Chapter 2221, Frontlines. Chapter 2221, Frontlines. Ling Han took a few steps forwards, and then bowed to pay his respects, saying, "Greetings, Eternity Celestial King." No need for excessive politeness. The Eternity Celestial King turned around, but all Ling Han could see was an empty void. It was as if this person did not even exist in this plane of existence, which was incredibly bizarre. When the Eternity Celestial King saw this, he merely smiled calmly and said, "This is only a sliver of thought that I have left in this place. My real self is still at the connecting point of the two realms, embroiled in battle with the foreign realm." He paused and then continued, "You do not have to ask too many questions. You merely have to listen to me speak. At present, a situation has arisen in the connecting point of the two realms. A neutral zone has actually appeared, and whether it is our celestial realm or the foreign realm, we are unable to draw on the regulations of heaven and earth there. We can only use the power and regulations that are stored up in our bodies in battle. Now, this neutral zone still has restrictions on cultivation level. Only those in ascending origin tier and below may pass through. Those of the Celestial King tier can only stand outside and watch. Some days ago, the foreign realm provoked us, asking for a battle between the younger generation of both sides. Us old folks gave it some thought, and thought that we should also allow the youths of this generation to train themselves and be aware of how strong and fearful the foreign realm can be. Thus we agreed. Your ways are quite impressive, and we haven't found you in these few days. Never mind, every person has their own secrets, and I have no intentions of pursuing the matter either. Since you have come out of seclusion and have also broken through to the immortal palace tier at that, then go there and make your own contributions on behalf of our celestial realm." If Ling Han had not known about the storm of darkness previously, he would definitely have been completely puzzled. Yet now that he was clear about what the Eternity Celestial King was talking about, he also knew that a change had taken place in the war between the two realms. A neutral zone had actually appeared at the connecting point. If this zone widened continuously and could allow even stronger people to enter, wouldn't the celestial realm be in trouble? Ling Han thus thought and quickly replied, "This junior is willing to do what I can for the celestial realm." "All right, go on then." The Eternity Celestial King waved him off. "Your identity letter can open the transfer formation. At present, the only transfer formation is near the connecting point of the two realms. Hee, looks like you already know about the storm of darkness." "Yes, I do," Ling Han replied, bowing. The Eternity Celestial King nodded and took a second look at Ling Han. "Brat, you are really quite determined to actually surrender 9 source powers of heaven and earth. If it had been myself of the past, would I have had that kind of courage?" His expression was slightly dazed. Clearly, he could not decide at this moment. It should be known that celestial kings were incredibly resolute, yet now he was actually hesitating, which showed how Ling Han willing to give up the 9 source powers of heaven and earth was such a great, decisive feat. Ha 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 ha. The Eternity Celestial King suddenly laughed loudly, his eyes shining brightly. "The fact that I would hesitate so long is already clearly telling of the problem. Young man, I am very optimistic about you. Come to the connecting point of the two realms. I want to see you with my own eyes, help you quickly raise your cultivation level, and who knows, you may create the future. Go on." Ling Han bowed respectfully and then retreated out of the house. He thought for a moment. In any case, the Rain Emperor and the others would be advancing to the time, mystery realm in spirit form, so it could be done anywhere. Hence, he did not return, and just brought Ling Hua and the others towards the transference portal. After showing their identity letters, the 11 of them entered into the transfer formation. A mysterious and majestic power surged over them, and they arrived in a new location. This was a desolate plain, and there were corpses everywhere. However, their shapes were strange, and they were burning in flames. Ling Han looked closely. Those were not the regulations of fire, but rather Tao flames. When a person died, their Tao would be extinguished. But there were some beings that were too strong, and even though their spirits had died, their bodies were still present. However, the heaven and earth would not allow beings that were too strong to remain in the world, and would use the Tao flames of heaven and earth to burn the corpses of these elites completely. That was the case now. The heaven and earth was refining the remains of such elites. These are the corpses of elites of the foreign realm. Beside the transfer formation, an elder was seated. His face was completely covered with wrinkles and was average-looking. He did not show the slightest sign of a powerful aura. Ling Han glanced at him, yet a boundless chill rose up suddenly within him. He felt that this elder could easily turn him into nothing with just a mere thought. "Young man, your destination is the stronghold at the end of the desolate plain," the elder said. "We have built a stronghold at the border of the celestial realm and laid down a super great formation to resist the invasion of the foreign realm. However, occasionally, some strong beings would still be able to sneak over, and this desolate plain has become a second battlefield." Ling Han could only nod in response. This elder had to be a celestial king, and probably a higher-level celestial king at that. Otherwise, he would not have been qualified to stand guard here. He would have been easily killed. He surveyed the surroundings curiously. This was the second battlefield in the war between the celestial realm and foreign realm, and it was also the last line of defense. If the foreign realm's invasion reached this place, they would be able to penetrate deep and enter into the vast celestial realm. Clearly, this line of defense was not as firm as a mountain, because the internal area of the celestial realm had already been corroded by the foreign realm by a great portion. This was also understandable, as it would be difficult to stay on defense constantly. "Senior, we juniors will take our leave then." Ling Han clasped his hands towards the elder in farewell. Then he strode forwards and began the transmigration to the desolate plains. After they stepped into the desolate plains, Ling Han immediately discovered a terrifying aura surging towards them. It turned into ugly, evil spirits wanting to corrode his soul. His spirit did not waver, and he merely strode forwards. Since that elder allowed him to pass, it meant that there was definitely no danger here. As expected, these evil spirits only came towards him, yet could not take a step further. It was as if there was an invisible barrier that was protecting Ling Han. Ling Hua and the others were the same as well. They were all manifested from the source powers of heaven and earth, and had experienced who knew how many changes through the ages, so it was natural that they could not possibly be easily scared. There were corpses scattered all around the desolate plain. Because this was far behind the front lines of the celestial realm, it was natural that the corpses of elites from the celestial realm could not be seen here. They definitely had to have been dealt with properly. The remains here were all from the elites of the foreign realm, and they were basically divided into two categories. One type was human form, yet had the hooves of a bull as their feet, horns growing from their foreheads, and a tail at their bottoms. The other type was the form of insects, with 6 legs, double wings, and there were even inverted spikes on their legs, exuding a cold light. These two forms were both very familiar. Ling Han had previously seen the so-called deity on the island, and their image was a human with horns and a tail. Furthermore, in a mystery realm, he had also seen the severed limb of a heavenly venerate from the foreign realm, and it was an insect leg that had inverted spikes. He had a guess in mind, and that was that this human form with horns and a tail was the corresponding humans of the foreign realm, while the insect forms should be corresponding to wild beasts. They were indeed two completely different worlds. Ling Han mused ruefully as he strode forwards. There was no danger in the desolate plains. Though there were many corpses of elites from the foreign realm, they were being burnt by the Tao flames of heaven and earth, and no longer had their vicious might. They could not possibly pose any further threat to Ling Han and the others. However, it was incredibly hard to walk here, such that even their foreheads had broken out in sweat, and every step further was a challenge. After about 3 months, a majestic, great city finally appeared ahead of them. The cities in the celestial realm were all as huge as planets, and this one was one of the most well-known. Its colossal size was indescribable, and it was entirely afloat in the air, with multiple streaks of starlight descending, appearing extremely magnificent. This was the first line of confrontation between the foreign realm and the celestial realm. Chapter 2222, Treated with Disdain. Chapter 2222, Treated with Disdain. This was no ordinary city, but rather a stronghold. Formation patterns covered the walls of the city, exuding a powerful air of danger that was supreme, as if it was a ninth heaven celestial king. No. It was not like one, but 10 or even tens of them working together to stand guard here, which was extremely frightening. Ling Han nodded internally. If that wasn't the case, how could they possibly stand guard against the mad barrage of assaults from the foreign realm? This was a stronghold. There were no gates of entry on either side, which Ling Han was slightly stunned by. He had no idea what he should do. Right at this moment, a man strode towards him. He wore only a piece of animal hide on him, his figure broad, wide and sturdy. There was actually a star on his shoulder. Though it was only the size of a fist, it was emanating a fiercely powerful aura. "Where have you come from?" this man asked. He looked to be in his 30s, and the parts of his body that were not covered by the animal hide were covered with scars. Ling Han was slightly surprised. That was because this man's cultivation level was the immortal palace tier, and had even reached the extent of third secret. For Celestials, even if they were missing limbs, their injuries would recover in an instant. How could so many scars be left behind? There was only one reason, and that was the martial intent of the foreign realm was left in these scars, and this affected his recovery. This was a stronghold, standing off against the front lines of the foreign realm. Clearly, the injuries he had were left behind by the cultivators of the foreign realm. Ling Han felt great respect to those in the stronghold. They were fighting bravely at the front lines, but to say nothing of gaining the gratitude of others, there were not many people in the celestial realm that were even aware of their existence. Yet now, this person's attitude displeased Ling Han slightly. This was a kind of interrogating question that carried disdain. Ling Han suppressed his displeasure. On the basis that the other man had bled and fought for the celestial realm, he answered calmly, "Saintly Origin Academy." "Saintly Origin Academy." The middle-aged man faltered slightly, and then revealed a disdainful expression, saying, "The students of Saintly Origin Academy have arrived 8 years ago. Though there were some that arrived later, it would not have passed the limit of 2 years. He peered at Ling Han, and the disdain at his lips became even more pronounced. "You must be a coward, coming only after dragging it out so long. You must have some powerful figure backing you up, right? However, forced by the circumstances, you had to come whether you were willing to or otherwise." Ling Han was slightly surprised. This guy really had a good imagination. How did he manage to come with such a deduction? He smiled calmly and said, "I have come to report here as commanded by the Eternity Celestial King, so it would be best to let me enter the city first." "Humph! How do I know that you aren't a member of the foreign realm here in disguise?" this middle-aged man demanded coldly, a cold smirk on his face. "Are you purposely causing trouble here?" Ling Hu demanded loudly. He was manifested from the source power of flames, so his temper was also extraordinarily explosive. He was the first that lost his patience. The middle-aged man glanced at him and scoffed. "Do you think that just any random character would be qualified to enter into the clear heaven pass?" Right in his eyes, Ling Han and his group had all become random characters. He felt that Ling Han and his group had come too late, so they had to be cowards fearing death, so it was natural that he felt a great disdain towards them. "When we were bleeding for the celestial realm, what were you people doing?" The middle-aged man surveyed Ling Han and his group arrogantly. Your lives were exchanged with the lives of the many generations of our ancestors. And you actually dare act unreasonable with me? And shout at me? Who do you people think you are? By the look of things, it seemed like he wanted nothing more than to spit all over their faces. Finally, Ling Han understood. This guy was actually feeling unbalanced. Judging by his words, he had been in this stronghold since birth, and had never seen the prosperity of the celestial realm. Originally, it was nothing too major. He had grown up in a world of violence and danger, and had long since become accustomed to bloodshed. However, when large masses of students from the Saintly Origin Academy came here, poor kids like them, who had grown up in the stronghold, found out that there was actually a colorful world outside of this place. Some of them would be defiant, and their unbalanced psyche would naturally be expected. Indeed, they could not understand. Why was it that generations of them had to stand guard here in this harsh place, bleed and cry, and might have to make funeral arrangements for their companions every day? With this kind of psychology, when this middle-aged man discovered that Ling Han and the others were cowards, his negative feelings naturally burst out completely. Now that he understood this, Ling Han felt slight pity for this guy, and thus did not get angry. Instead, he pressed a hand on Ling Hu's shoulder and said, "Hee, we also hope to do what we can for the celestial realm. So please make arrangements for our entry into the city." The middle-aged man scoffed. "Sorry, the Clear Heaven Pass does not welcome cowards. I know that people like you who have come here merely want to gain some experience and military credit. But you all have come to the wrong place." Ling Han's expression darkened slightly. "Don't just throw insults as you please. There's a reason why we have come late, and even celestial kings have not reprimanded us. What right do you have to blabber nonsense like this here?" "Humph! So you've shown your true colors now." The middle-aged man sneered. "Because I hit the nail on the head, you are now shamed into anger. Don't use whatever celestial king to intimidate me. I fight bravely here, and am not even afraid of the people from the foreign realm. How could you possibly scare me?" Ling Han didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This man went down a dead end too easily. After he was sure that they were cowards, he insisted firmly that this was the truth. He shook his head and said, "If you continue to blabber nonsense like this, I won't be polite." "Ha, you actually want to fight me?" The middle-aged man sneered. How would delicate flowers that had been cultivated in a greenhouse, like the cruelties of war? I have been battling the foreign realm every single day, polishing my own battle prowess. Even if our cultivation levels were the same, I would still be able to suppress all of you single-handedly. He smirked coldly. The auras emitting from Ling Han and his group were only at first secret, their cultivation level being far lower and weaker than his. Get out of the Clear Heaven Pass. This is not the place for you to come and act recklessly. He moved aggressively. Boom! Multiple vein patterns immediately appeared on his right hand, humming loudly as he grabbed out at Ling Han. Ling Han was slightly surprised because, while this man was clearly not a king tier, the attack he delivered was close to the standards of a king tier. This was very inconceivable. Could it be that the daily contact with death would transform one completely? Ling roared furiously. He hadn't been able to hold himself back in the first place, and had not exploded only because Ling Han was subduing him. Now, seeing the middle-aged man attack, he was naturally the first to rush out and greet the oncoming attack with a punch of his own. Boom! His whole person had turned into flames. The 9 heavens flame was naturally overbearing. Pum! The two of them exchanged a blow, and at the same time their figures trembled. The shock wave created from the impact point reverberated boundlessly. The middle-aged man's expression inadvertently changed drastically as he asked, "Monarch Tier?" The other was a first secret, yet could manage to tie with a third secret like him. If he was not a monarch tier, how could he accomplish this? Yet, the disdain in his expression was even more pronounced. A great monarch tier was actually such a coward. What a humiliation. So what if you are a monarch tier? In this clear heaven pass, even a monarch tier would have to crawl. He moved aggressively, and with a tremor of his hands, multiple veins popped, turning into strong dragons, boosting his battle prowess endlessly. Go down! He sent out his fist in a punch that moved to suppress Ling Hua. Chapter 22-23 Conflict. Chapter 22-23 Conflict. Ling Hua smiled proudly. He was no ordinary monarch tier, but manifested from the source power of heaven and earth, and possessed a sliver of celestial king tier might. In other words, before the celestial king tier, he would be stronger than a typical monarch tier, and could be considered a top-grade monarch tier. However, compared with freaks like Ling Han and Ji Wuming, he was still slightly inferior. What right did a king tier have to act arrogant in front of him? Even if he was 2 minor levels higher, it would still be useless. He also raised his fists to greet the oncoming attack from the middle-aged man, and what he was using was shockingly the fists of fury. The 9 great source powers of heaven and earth had initially been fused with Ling Han, so they naturally possessed all the celestial techniques that Ling Han had grasped. Of course, now that they had been separated and gained their independence, all the ultimate techniques that Ling Han comprehended and cultivated in the future would have no relation to them any longer. Fists of fury blasted out, their might shaking the heavens. The middle-aged man instantly fell into a disadvantage. In the first place, he was no match for Ling Hua. What more now, when the latter had used the fists of fury? Pung! Over a dozen moves later, a punch landed on his left shoulder. He stumbled backwards continuously, and when he turned his head to look, he saw that there was a charred print of a fist left on his shoulder, which was still emanating the aroma of barbecued meat. The middle-aged man was both furious and shocked. Suddenly, he pointed at clear heaven pass in the skies, mumbling something under his breath. Whatever he was muttering could not be discerned at all, right until the end when he shouted loudly. A streak of silvery light shot out of clear heaven pass and shone on him. Boom! His aura suddenly soared rapidly, as if it had been strengthened several times in an instant. Suppress! He shot out, and battled fiercely with Ling Hu once more. Boom! 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 The power of regulation resonated, forming a brilliant light of Tao that was incredibly intense. What shocked Ling Han and the others was that this guy actually managed to fight Ling Hua to a tie. This powerful stronghold could actually increase the power of cultivators. Ling Han couldn't help but recall the deity that was worshipped by the force of darkness. Wasn't it also a statue, yet could grant a power boost of around 10 times to one's battle prowess? This was extremely amazing. Ling Hua's temper was also ignited with the battle. His body took the form of fiery flames, capable of melting all other regulations. He was a source power of heaven and earth, so it would be strange if his battle prowess was not strong. After the fierce battle continued for about half a day, the middle-aged man's aura suddenly trembled and became incredibly unstable. Then it declined rapidly, and his battle prowess also fell drastically as well, as if the power boost granted to him by clear heaven pass had already been exhausted. Ling Hua took the opportunity to attack fiercely. Pung! 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 The middle-aged man was sent back into continuous retreat. Li Hongfei, you drew on the power of clear heaven pass, and actually did not manage to defeat a first secret cultivator? Another man walked out, similarly dressed in animal hide, appearing incredibly gruff and coarse. The middle-aged man from before wiped the trace of blood at the corner of his lips, and his fighting spirit became even more uplifted instead of reducing. He humphed and declared, "Dang Li, don't interfere in my affairs." The man that came later smirked coldly and retorted, "You can only use the power of clear heaven pass once a month, yet have wasted it here. It is already displeasing to Lord Nya, who has especially commanded that I come to take a look." He paused and then continued, "Weren't you asked to investigate the identities of these people?" Why have you gotten into battle with them? Li Hongfei humphed and replied, These people claim that they come from the Saintly Origin Academy. Saintly Origin Academy? Dang Li's eyes swept over Ling Han and the others, and similarly looked disdainful. Is that the academy that was co-founded by the Ninth Heaven Celestial Kings? Humph, they have so many resources at their disposal, but they are all such trash. If these resources had been used on us, we would have been able to advance into the Ascending Origin tier. Li Hongfei declared, nodding. Let me ask you, since you are the disciples of Saintly Origin Academy, why have you come so late? Dang, Li shouted this question at Ling Han and his group. Ling Han shook his head and replied, You too are merely guides. What right do you have to interrogate us? Just answer whatever question you are asked. Spare the nonsense. Dang, Li exclaimed impatiently. Just like Li Hongfei, he was filled with envy and disdain towards Ling Han and those who had grown up in a safe, peaceful environment. Ling Han chuckled. Initially, I have been quite respectful of you guys, but you are so determined to ruin these affections. Now, I can't be bothered to waste words on you. I will give you two options. First, invite us into the city, or second, I will capture both of you, and then you can bring us into the city. Which do you choose? Hee, you are trying to overwhelm us with numbers. Dang Li smirked coldly. You are truly naive. This is Clear Heaven Pass, and we have multiplied who knows how many generations here, and you're trying to compare with us in numbers? He took out a bull's horn, but it was entirely golden. Then he put it to his mouth and spoke a few words into it. In a short while, multiple streaks of light surged beneath the great city, revealing one person after another. There were men and women. Some men were dressed very simply. That was in a piece of animal hide. Some men's attire was no different with the others of the celestial realm embroidered robes, which looked very luxurious. But the women's attire were all completely long skirts and beautifully made up. They had all carefully matched their attire. Dang Li smiled proudly and declared, In terms of numbers, we have more. As he spoke, these people had already walked to stand next to Dang Li and Li Hongfei. There were a total of 17 of them, and added with Dang Li and Li Hongfei, they totaled 19, though their manner of dress differed. As they stood there, they were all exuding an aura akin to primitive beasts. This was an aura that could only be formed after experiencing countless battles. It was also through this aura that they could be distinguished as the natives of Clear Heaven Pass. Ling Han stated calmly, We have come to the Clear Heaven Pass under command of a Clear Heaven Pass. So why must you cause trouble for us? Having beaten up one of us, you say it is us causing the trouble. A native immediately jumped out, though he was dressed in embroidered robes. It could not conceal the primitive air he exuded. He appeared incredibly irritable. We have bled and sacrificed for the celestial realm. We are not here to suffer your insults and humiliation. This accusation was too severe. Ling Han shook his head and retorted, Just to sentence us with crime, there is no lack of words. Come on then. Since you guys love to fight so much, come, all of you together. I will then beat you into submission. Impudence! Li Hongfei and the others cried out in rebuke. Ling Han smiled. Wasn't it a fight you wanted? Why do you have to be so reserved? No need to waste words on them. We'll capture them and beat them up first. Take them a notch down, Dang Li declared impatiently. Right, beat them up first, then talk, one woman said aggressively. All 19 of them looked keen and eager. The eyes they directed at Ling Han made it seem like they were fierce wolves that had spotted a rabbit. Ling Han turned to Ling Hua and the others and said, The rest of you, step down first. Master! Ling Hua and the rest exclaimed in defiance. They, too, wanted a battle, but should Ling Han move, they would definitely have no opportunity for a fight. Ling Han chucked. It's all right. In the future, there will be more than enough battles for you. Now, we don't have the time to waste on a few minor characters. What did you say? When Li Hongfei and the others heard Ling Han's words, they all looked furious. He actually dared to call them minor characters. Though they weren't the most outstanding generation of Clear Heaven Pass, all of them had come from great clans, and their status could be considered lofty and noble, and now they were actually looked down on as minor characters, which naturally pissed them off. We'll capture him first. That's right. He seems to be the leader of these cowards. To defeat the enemy, the chief must be captured first, and it would also be more fulfilling to beat up the leader. The 19 of them moved at the same time, wanting to use their united power to capture Ling Han in a single stroke. Chapter 22-24 Gained Respect. Chapter 22-24 Gained Respect. The 19 of them moved at the same time. Though their cultivation levels varied, the weakest was at second secret, and the majority were at third secrets, with so many of them attacking at the same time. Their might was naturally world-shaking. However, Ling Hua and the others merely crossed their arms over their chests, appearing to be completely unconcerned. They had watched Ling Han in battle many times, and suppressing third secret king tiers was naturally child's play for him. Now that Ling Han had further advanced to the first secret, even a fifth secret king tier could just barely match him. However, Li Hongfei and the others were unaware that Ling Han was that strong. When they saw that Ling Han was indeed going to confront elites like them alone, they couldn't help but smirk coldly. He bit off more than he could chew. Boom! Multiple giant hands descended, as if multiple stars were falling down, which was incredibly terrifying. Ling Han smiled slightly and casually swept out his hand. Pung, pung, pung. He had instantly sent all 19 of them flying backwards, all of them throwing up blood madly. And this was still because he had held back. Otherwise, he would have been able to insta-kill all 19 of them. Li Hongfei and his group all paled in shock. He was only a mere first secret, yet could actually defeat all 19 of them in an instant. What kind of concept was that? Monarch tier. Even a monarch tier could only be invincible against an opponent superior by 2 levels, which was equivalent to a third secret king tier, but there were as many as 10 such elites among them, so no matter what, they shouldn't have been defeated by Ling Han in a single blow. Above monarch tier, Li Hongfei said shakily, even his body was trembling. Such an existence was called Monarch Star in the Clear Heaven Pass, placed high above as if they were in the 9th heaven, and other monarch tiers could only look up at them. Monarch Star! Dang, Li also exclaimed, his expression filled with disbelief. This coward in their eyes was actually a monarch star, a supreme overlord that would definitely become a 9th heaven celestial king in future. They exchanged looks, and then all yielded, falling to one knee. Greetings, my lord. The people of Clear Heaven Pass were all incredibly realistic. Monarch stars would definitely become 9th heaven celestial kings. This was the strongest power of the Clear Heaven Pass, and was also the rock main pillar that stood against the foreign realm, and would be nurtured with great focus. Thus, Deng Li and the others immediately knelt and conceded. Ling Han faltered as well. He had seen many different types of people, but he had not seen many that were like them. He nodded and said, "Rise." Only then did Li Hongfei and the others stand up. One of them said, "Please come into the pass, my lord." They set out together, but did not fly to that stronghold in the skies. Instead, they arrived at the area beneath the stronghold, and Ling Han saw that there were formation patterns carved on the ground. It was clear that they had been there a long time, and some traces were already modeled. They stood on the formation patterns, and after Deng Li used the horn to say a few words, a light surged over, wrapping around them. When the light flashed again, they had already appeared in the great city in the skies. Clear Heaven Pass dominated the path that the foreign realm had to take in their invasion. It was incredibly majestic, and when they appeared inside it, they could immediately feel a militaristic air of bloodshed and an ancient air of age that assaulted their senses. Even a person with the weakest character would be influenced by this atmosphere when they came here and proceed to show a stronger side of themselves. Please come with us. Li Hongfei and the others continued to lead the way, bringing Ling Han and his group onwards. In other places of the celestial realm, every city was as huge as a planet. Thus, there were actually mountains and rivers here, which was then followed by scattered towns. But in this place, there were no mountains or bodies of water. It was all structures that were constructed from stones, filled with a primitive air. Occasionally, they could see the corpses of elites of the foreign realm. They had been suppressed in the formation, and their power was being extracted and supplied for the whole defense system of the great city. They traveled for slightly less than half a day's time before finally arriving in front of a stone military camp. Then Li Hongfei brought Ling Han and his group in to meet with the person in charge here. That was a man with a single eye. A piece of black cloth covered his left eye, and his black hair hung over his shoulders. His upper body was bared, muscles bulging as if they were built from mountain rock. An ascending origin tier, Ling Han thought. He had cultivated the heaven-deceiving technique, and thus was the most sensitive to auras. However, because the gap in their cultivation levels was too wide, he could not judge the others' exact cultivation level. New disciples from the Saintly Origin Academy, this one-eyed man said. Yes. Ling Han nodded, then turned around and pointed at Ling Hua and the others. They are my followers. The one-eyed man was slightly surprised because he could sense how strong Ling Hua and the others were. Instead, it was Ling Han that seemed very ordinary. This, naturally, was because of the heaven-deceiving technique. He was not overly curious, though, and said, "You have been recruited under my leadership. We are 17th Camp of Unit D, and I am your senior officer. My name is Nyahashan. Settle down first, and I will slowly assign missions to you." Ling Han nodded and said, "My lord, we will beg our leave first then." They walked out of Nyahashan's stone house, and Li Hongfei approached them again. "My lord, let me arrange accommodations for you." "Tell me about the recent situation," Ling Han asked. "Yes." Li Hongfei began to talk about the major events that had happened in these few years. Just as the Eternity Celestial King had said, the foreign realm had issued a written war challenge to the celestial realm, wanting to hold matches for the younger generation. However, in these years, it had only been severing mundane tier and dividing soul tier prodigies that were battling, and had not yet been raised to the level of the immortal palace tier. Judging by the present situation, the celestial realm side was in extremely terrible circumstances. That was because the younger generation of the celestial realm had fought a total of 17 battles, yet had lost every single one of them. The prodigies of the celestial realm were too strong. From severing mundane tier to dividing 7 souls, there were supreme monarch tiers in each level, especially in the dividing soul tier, where there was no shortage of dividing 5 souls, dividing 6 souls, or even dividing 7 souls elites. Though it was possible that they could never attain dividing 9 souls, their strength was much greater than that of dividing 4 souls monarch tiers. This was an absolutely one-sided suppression. And it was also because of these repeated losses that the celestial realm did not dare to easily agree to starting an immortal palace tier competition with the foreign realm. Why? That was because, while the celestial realm had such monarch stars like Ji Wuming and Jiaolan, the cultivation levels of these 4 great monarch stars were too low. As long as the foreign realm had such monarch stars, they only had to attain 2nd secret or 3rd secret, and they would be able to suppress Ji Wuming and the others. Hence, they did not dare agree to another match with the foreign realm, fearing that it would result in a complete loss again. If that was the case, the morale of the cultivators of the celestial realm would drop to rock bottom. The celestial realm would definitely go to war again with the foreign realm and boost their military morale, which was already very low, but it was definitely not now. At least, it would have to wait until Ji Wuming and the others reached the 5th secret. Thus, in the recent times, the monarch tiers had all been sent into the most dangerous locations, cultivating amidst bloody battles to increase their cultivation level as soon as possible. Of course, the cultivation resources they obtained were also exceedingly high in amount. All kinds of natural treasures were poured on them. This was also one of the reasons for why Li Hongfei and the others hated Ling Han. They felt that those like him had been rewarded without any efforts, and this was unfair for the citizens of Clear Heaven Pass. On the other side, the connecting point between the two realms had become more and more stable. Perhaps, after another while, even heavenly venerable Tyr power would be able to pass. By then, it would not be minor skirmishes like this, but a full-out war. Hence, the present generation had to mature as quickly as possible. After Ling Han settled down, he immediately entered into the Black Tower to concoct alchemical pills so that the Empress and the others could break through to the immortal palace Tyr as soon as possible. Only a day had passed in the outside world, and Ling Han had concocted enough thousand-year dream pills, which would be sufficient for them to enter the time mystery realm a few more times. Chapter 22-25 Neutral Zone. Chapter 22-25 Neutral Zone. Ling Han cultivated inside the Black Tower, and the Empress and the others continued to ingest the thousand-year dream pills and attempt to break through to the immortal palace Tyr. There was no concept of time inside the time mystery realm, and the Black Tower had 10,000 times acceleration effects. Hence, only a single day had passed in the outside world, but the Empress and the others could attempt to break through to the immortal palace Tyr several times. The prerequisite was that there were enough thousand-year dream pills. 3 days later, Hunyao was the first to break through, and the Empress also broke through in quick succession a while after her. Then another day passed, and the Rain Emperor had also successfully broken through to the immortal palace. Tyr the Rain Emperor had been slower because the dividing 9 souls breaking through to the immortal palace Tyr was clearly more difficult. Another 2 days later, bewitching maiden Ro finally broke through to the immortal palace Tyr. And at this time, Nyaheshan had also issued a command. The 17th camp would be mobilizing fully and entering into the neutral zone for practice. In this neutral zone, the regulations of the two realms had clashed fiercely, ripping apart the earth and turning the world upside down. Regulations had turned into shards, and a great many monsters had also come into existence. They did not belong to the celestial realm, nor the foreign realm, and were independent of the world. The Rain Emperor and the others also reported, and had all been taken into the 17th camp of Unit D, led by Nyaheshan. In this camp, aside from the outstanding students of Saintly Origin Academy, there was also the younger generation of natives of Clear Heaven Pass, and they had formed a group. There were many other such groups, and their goal was to improve everyone's cultivation level as quickly as possible through the cruelties of battle. There were a total of 214 people in the 17th camp, and 10 to 12 people would make up a small team, and every team would have a team leader. Because Ling Han and his group had come late, they were split apart and distributed among these 20 teams, so they were not together. Though they had requested to be placed together, Nyaheshan had not agreed, so they could only settle for this arrangement temporarily. With Nyaheshan leading, they exited the Clear Heaven Pass and entered into that neutral zone. After walking for half a day, Nyaheshan had the 20 team leaders lead their teams and move freely. The team leader of Ling Han's team was Xin Chao, a native of Clear Heaven Pass. His cultivation level had reached the 5th secret immortal palace Tyr, and he was a monarch Tyr at that, which was very extraordinary. Though Clear Heaven Pass looked barren and inhospitable, with poor conditions, the military and harsh environment had produced countless prodigies, and Xin Chao was only one of them. He could not be considered one of the highest tier of prodigies. Like Li Hongfei and the others, Xin Chao did not particularly have positive feelings towards disciples of Saintly Origin Academy. The gaze he swept over them carried a powerful disdain, and he treated the 5 disciples of Saintly Origin Academy in his team with great contempt. Young Master Han, The 4 other students of Saintly Origin Academy naturally recognized Ling Han and greeted him respectively. The 4 of them were all at the dividing soul tier, and it just so happened that there was one at Heaven Soul, Earth Soul, Yin Soul, and Yang Soul respectively. They should have been deliberately arranged in this manner. Ling Han nodded and surveyed his surroundings. They had already entered into a valley. One side of the valley wall had a crack that was as wide as 9 meters, and if he gazed within, its depths were unfathomable, and he could not see the bottom at all. And if he released his divine sense within, it would be like a mud bull sinking into the ocean, instantly disappearing. This space had been warped and destroyed, and it was no ordinary void either, but rather one formed through the collision of 2 words. No one knew exactly what the situation was inside. Perhaps only a celestial king could enter and explore, but this place was suppressed by the heaven and earth of the 2 realms. Even an ascending origin tier could not enter, and it was even more impossible for a celestial king. If they barged in forcefully, it would only cause themselves to shatter. This zone had not appeared a very long time ago. What Ling Han and his group were to do was, firstly, to train themselves, and secondly, to draw out a map of this place. In the future, this would be the great battlefield in the war between the 2 realms, and they had to get a clear grasp of the situation here. Of course, someone had to have already investigated the situation here and confirmed the level of danger here. Otherwise, they would not have been allowed to recklessly enter this place. Shen Chao split the team into 4 groups, with 2 to 3 people in each group. Then he had them move separately to observe the terrain and draw the map. There were a total of 3 people in Ling Han's small group. Aside from him, the other 2 were both students of the Saintly Origin Academy. One was called Lu Zhen, and the other was called Mei Hua, and they were Yin Soul and Earth Soul, respectively, so it was natural that they looked to him for leadership. They had been delegated to the western parts of the valley. The environment here was utterly terrible, and the path very craggy and rugged, covered with sharp rocks that were like blades and were capable of easily piercing through the soles of their feet. Because there were no regulations of the celestial realm here, they naturally were not able to fly. It was not impossible for them to fly by force, but it would expend the regulations locked within their bodies. But who knew what kind of dangers there were in this place? Once the regulations were exhausted, their strength would be dropping to the Genesis tier. Yet Ling Han did not have such reservations, because he had the Black Tower. Even if the Black Tower was a heavenly venerate, precious treasure, it could not form regulations either. However, it could absorb a great amount of regulations and accumulate them, and the volume far surpassed the amount that could be locked within Ling Han's own body if it had to be compared. That would be equivalent to the amount that one or even several ninth heaven celestial kings could store up. This meant that Ling Han could use regulations without reservations. No matter how much an immortal palace tier used regulations, how long would they have to use regulations to be able to exhaust a ninth heaven celestial king? It was practically impossible. He naturally would not be bringing up this kind of thing. This was his trump card. In the future, if anyone wanted to fight him one after another in hopes of exhausting his energy, that would be basically pointless effort. Instead, it would allow him to find weaknesses and gain victory. They all used regulations to safeguard themselves, so their bodies were slightly afloat to avoid being wounded by the sharp rocks. And this was not too exhausting of the regulations, either. Wang, a strange creature, suddenly appeared. Its upper body was human, but its lower body was like a fierce tiger. Its whole body exuded a crystalline luster, was capable of absorbing light, and had a powerful ability of invisibility. Thus, Ling Han and his group were all slightly taken off guard when it appeared. It pounced towards Ling Han and the others, its hands flourishing. Boom! It created a powerful wave. It wasn't that there were no regulations in this place, just that the regulations here could not be used by the cultivators of the 2 realms. However, the creatures that were born here were not limited by this restriction. As it launched its attack, there were many afterimages. Lu Zhen exclaimed lightly, and took the initiative to greet the incoming blow. Pung, pung, pung. They were immediately fighting intensely. At first, Ling Han was unconcerned as this creature's battle prowess was only around Earth Soul, but he soon became intrigued because the regulations that this creature used were extremely strange. They did not belong to the celestial realm, but were not part of the foreign realm. Either after the two worlds had collided, two types of regulations also clashed, creating a great change. In other words, this was a small world that was independent of both the celestial realm and the foreign realm. However, the overall level of regulations here was too low and had suppressed the cultivation levels of the beings here. For example, only immortal Palastiers could enter this space, which meant that the upper limit of the regulations here was also the immortal Palastier. However, this world had just been formed, and the regulations still had a great space for growth. Its limits could still be further raised, and perhaps could reach the level of ascending origin tier or even celestial king tier. Interesting, Ling Han thought, and an idea came to him. If he could comprehend the regulations here, then wouldn't it mean that he would also be able to comprehend the regulations of the foreign realm after he went there? This place was formed by the collision of two realms, and that was the same for regulations as well. It had the regulations of the celestial realm as well as the regulations of the foreign realm. If Ling Han couldn't even comprehend the regulations here, how would he be able to comprehend the regulations of the foreign realm then? Chapter 22-26, New Heaven and Earth. Chapter 22-26, New Heaven and Earth. Lu Zhen and that strange creature fought fiercely, locked in a tight battle. Because this zone had come into being only recently and had formed unique creatures that had grasp of unique regulations, Ling Han could not judge whether this creature was an Earth Soul Emperor tier, a Heaven Soul King tier, or something else. Their understanding of this region and the new creatures in this region was zero. But Ling Han was sure that since Lu Zhen could not win in a short time, then it was definite that he definitely would not be able to. The reason was very simple. The regulations stored up in his body would be exhausted quickly, and by then his battle prowess would drop drastically, and he would be easily killed by this creature. Though Lu Zhen also knew this fact, he did not panic because there was Ling Han standing behind him. If he could no longer battle, once Ling Han moved, he would be able to instantly suppress his opponent. For the moment, Ling Han had no plans to move. He was studying the unique regulations of this place. Directly comprehending the regulations was as difficult as ascending the heavens. Just like if he were to enter into a different cultivation system without a guide, this was practically an impossible feat. Merely the regulations in his body would be endlessly expelling his attempts. But now that there was a creature of this place attacking, it provided reference material for Ling Han. So he had a sliver of hope to grasp the regulations of this place from the attacks of this creature. However, when the battle had reached the 8th hour, Lu Zhen suddenly fell into an exhausted state. He had not been able to suppress that creature, yet the regulations in his body were more or less exhausted, and he had thus sunk into a dilemma. Though he knew that there would be no danger to his life, his expression was still ugly. As an emperor tier, he naturally had great pride and thought that there was no opponent he could not suppress. Yet that wasn't the case now, which made his expression look ugly. Ling Han still did not move. For cultivators, life and death experiences were extremely important as they could better excite one's potential. Of course, Lu Zhen knew that he would definitely interfere, so it wasn't possible that his potential would be completely forced out. This was fine, though. In any case, Ling Han had no intentions of nurturing this person. Merely on the basis that they were both people of the celestial realm, he was willing to give him a chance. After fighting for another 30 minutes, Lu Zhen was in repeated danger. Blood would be streaming from his body endlessly, but he was still quite proud. For the whole period, he had not asked for Ling Han's help. However, his circumstances were worsening. That creature suddenly turned its hand into a blade that stabbed at his forehead. This attack was both quick and harsh. Strange seals flickered on its arm. If Lu Zhen was pierced through, it was probable that he would be dead in the present circumstances. Ling Han was slightly surprised. When the battle had progressed until now, this creature's battle prowess had actually been increasing all the while, though the rate was extremely small. However, with his insight, he naturally could notice this fact. It seemed as if this creature had initially had absolutely zero battle experience, yet now it was slowly being enlightened. It could be said that this region was still in a state of world creation. Thus, the creatures here were extremely primitive, and cultivation had just begun to develop. Every creature had a great room for growth. As he thought this, Ling Han moved carelessly, capturing that creature in a single stroke. Then he flung it onto the ground. Pung! A deep, bottomless pit was created in the ground, and that creature had already disappeared completely. Yet Ling Han was slightly dumbfounded. If he were to throw it at some other place, it was probable that a great explosion would take place in the nearest 50 kilometers, and everything would sink in. Yet now there was actually just a tiny pit like this, which showed how sturdy the structure of the heaven and earth in this place was. He stretched out his hand, and as his origin power surged, he plucked that creature from underground. Both Lu Zhen and Mei Hua exclaimed in shock, though. This creature's limbs were drooping. There were actually no wounds on it at all. It should be known that it had been harshly flung by a first secret monarch tier. Ling Han stretched out a hand and tugged at the hide of this creature. It bounced back, showing an astonishing elasticity. This defense is quite shocking. He nodded. No wonder I couldn't wound it at all, even after hitting it so many times. Lu Zhen inhaled sharply. Previously, it was indeed he that was at a slight advantage, and hit that creature a good many times, but he still did not manage to win. Ling Han mumbled. The world is newly created, and the first batch of creatures would be called Source Beasts. Their battle prowess far surpasses the creatures that would be born in later generations. Young Master Han, are you saying that this is a new heaven and earth? Both Lu Zhen and Mei Hua exclaimed in shock. They knew that this was a zone that had been created from the collision of the two realms, but they had never thought of anything else. Ling Han nodded. The power of the heaven and earth was strongest, and that was why they could suppress heavenly venerates. Thus, the heavenly venerates of the foreign realm could not come in here. They could only wait until the connecting point between the two realms stabilized to unleash their strongest offensive. Regulations were only subsidiary to the heaven and earth. This place was like a new heaven and earth, and it was definite that a batch of powerful creatures that belonged to this heaven and earth would be created. However, the heaven and earth here were still too young. The regulations were limited to the immortal palace tier, so the strongest creatures should only be the strongest of the immortal palace tier. It could not be helped. This heaven and earth were only formed through the collision of two original heaven and earth. Strictly speaking, this was only a zone and not an actual heaven and earth. Ling Han stretched out a hand and placed it on the head of that creature, moving to read its memories. Woo! He suddenly stumbled backwards, blood dripping from his nose and eyes. He felt his heart beating extremely hard, as if it was about to explode. He couldn't help but feel shocked. It should be known that he had cultivated his heart into the first mystery realm of the human body, and regulations of time were active there. Even then, it had still almost exploded, so it could be imagined just how dangerous it had been. Young Master Han! Lu Zhen and Mei Hua hurriedly supported Ling Han from either side. Ling Han stood firm and waved them off, saying, I'm fine, but you two must not attempt to extract the memories of this creature. It is too dangerous. Lu Zhen and Mei Hua both nodded. Even Ling Han had come off so badly, so if they really did that, that would definitely be suicidal. Ling Han wiped away the blood on his face. He did not give up and placed his hand down once more. Boom! A frightening aura filled with primal chaos surged towards him. as if capable of swallowing everything. Ling Han channeled the indestructible heaven scroll to stand off against it. Multiple streaks of golden light appeared on his body, turning into many ancient seals. They were not recognized by the heaven and earth, because Lu Zhen and Mei Hua glimpsed them for a while before complete darkness filled their vision. Their minds were completely empty, with nothing imprinted at all. This was the true meaning of the Great Tao that surpassed regulations of the Great Tao. It could be considered as another type of regulations of the Great Tao, so it was natural that they could not possibly study it. Without the Black Tower, Ling Han wouldn't have been able to cultivate the indestructible heaven scroll at all, unless he had reached heavenly venerable tier and gone back to cultivate from the beginning again. What meaning would there be to do that? The air of primal chaos swallowed Ling Han's soul completely, or rather assimilated him, dragging him into an endless darkness. Understanding rose up in Ling Han. This was a fusion of the regulations of both realms, so the creatures here inevitably carried the air of the foreign realm, which was filled with slaughter and murderous intent as well. He attempted to decipher the regulations within, but discovered that this was completely pointless. The regulations here were all shards and could not be studied at all. They could only be formed naturally by the heaven and earth. It could not be helped. This was not a real world, but a small zone that had been created from the collision of two worlds and two different types of regulations. However, through these shards of regulations, he had grasped some bits of the regulations of the foreign realm. Chapter 2227I. Chapter 2227I. At least 2 hours later, Ling Han finally released his hold. He could feel stickiness on his face, and when he touched it, he discovered that his hand was actually covered with bloody scabs. When he had been standing off against the heaven and earth's willpower inside that creature, his physical body actually could not bear it any longer. Blood flowed continuously from his orifices, and that was why his whole face was covered in blood. He shook his body, and not only was it his face, blood had also seeped out of his body all over, all congealing into bloody scabs, and almost turning him into a monster as well. However, as he was sustaining the barrage of regulations of a foreign creature, it was the same for that creature. Yet it was not as strong as Ling Han, and had already turned into a corpse. Every single inch of its body had cracked apart, yet it was exuding a refreshing fragrance. Actually, Ling Han had not been standing off against this creature, but rather the regulations of this place, and the result was that he had barely managed to resist them. After all, this was willpower of heaven and earth. The fact that he hadn't been killed was already a display of his absolute strength. This is celestial medicine, Lu Zhen suddenly exclaimed. He spread apart the body of that creature, and there was actually a tiny herb nurtured in its heart. It had borne 7 fruits, and the refreshing fragrance was exuded from the fruits. Ling Han took it out for a look, and his brow involuntarily wrinkled in a frown. This celestial medicine should be corresponding to this space, so it would probably be very hard to benefit us if we were to ingest it. He pondered for a while, and still passed 2 fruits to Lu Zhen and Mei Hua. Just take it first, and we'll see. Lu Zhen and Mei Hua naturally would not refuse. No matter how strange it was, a celestial medicine was still a celestial medicine. They did not dare say anything about how Ling Han had taken 5 fruits for himself, because this creature had been killed by Ling Han alone. Even if he had not given them anything, it would have been completely acceptable. That was a celestial medicine, so giving them a portion was already extremely generous. Ling Han stowed away the celestial medicine, as well as the corpse of this creature. He was very intrigued by this place, and planned to study it carefully. They continued onwards, and arrived at their targeted area. Then they began a careful observation, drafting the map. "Young Master Han, come and look." Lu Zhen suddenly ran over. Ling Han walked off with him and saw there was a small dark cave in one of the walls of the valley. "That's it." Ling Han was surprised. What was so interesting about this? Young Master Han, patience, Lu Zhen said. After a long while of waiting, Ling Han suddenly felt a great pull, which sucked him towards that cave. He hurriedly channeled the power of regulation, and his body immediately stopped. However, Lu Zhen did not have that kind of strength, and his body was rapidly falling forwards. Thankfully, he had long since prepared himself. As he moved his body to get rid of the force, he prevented his body from falling. However, this sucking force only persisted for a while and soon disappeared. Strange! Ling Han went to the cave mouth and extended his divine sense inwards. His divine sense entered for over 50 kilometers, and there was not the slightest change with the cave mouth. It was extremely narrow, and when it reached over 500 kilometers, this was already close to Ling Han's limits. In this heaven and earth, his divine sense would also be greatly restricted. He could still continue further, yet suddenly a feeling of danger rose up in him, and his divine sense abruptly returned inside his body like a subsiding tide. A chill suddenly assaulted him. Ling Han felt as if he had been targeted by some dangerous thing. This feeling was extremely bad, causing sweat to break out on his forehead involuntarily, and his back was damp with sweat as well. He looked again at that cave mouth, and all his hair was suddenly standing on ends. An eye. He saw an eye that was focused on him, emotionless and cold. Young Master Han. Lu Zhen hurriedly approached, and also looked towards the cave mouth, but he did not see anything. Ling Han waved a hand, and then glanced back at the cave mouth again. This time he did not see anything. We leave immediately. Though Lu Zhen was slightly confused, they had more or less completed their mission, so he did not raise any objections. Moreover, it was useless even if he did object. How could he influence Ling Han's decision? They called Mei Hua over and practically fled in a panic. Only at the moment they stepped out of the valley did the chill in Ling Han's heart gradually retreat. He could be certain that that was definitely not an illusion. Beneath this valley, a terrifying creature was hidden. To cause such wariness from a first secret monarch star like himself, it would definitely surpass the level of the immortal palace tier, an ascending origin tier. But didn't this heaven and earth only permit beings of the immortal palace tier? No, this heaven and earth had just formed recently, and the regulations were also evolving. In that case, what would be so strange about ascending origin tier creatures coming into being? However, the regulations had not been perfected, after all, so that creature was not able to emerge and could only spy on them. Otherwise, perhaps he, too, would not have been able to leave the valley just now. Of course, if he did not mind exposing the Black Tower, that ascending origin tier creature would not be able to threaten him, either. I have to improve my physique as soon as possible, Ling Han thought. However, at his present level, the improvement of his physique was not something that could be accomplished as simply as being struck by lightning, but would rather need endless amounts of celestial medicines working together with the indestructible heaven scroll to temper his physique. In other words, he needed money. Money, money, money. He was really lacking money. Why have you guys come back? Xin Chao appeared, his eyes sweeping over Ling Han and the others, a hint of displeasure in his expression. The mission is complete, Ling Han stated calmly, and threw over the map that they had drafted. Xin Chao grabbed it and swept over it with his divine sense, yet he could not show any dissatisfaction, because this map had indeed been completed. I also have a matter to report to Lord Nya, Ling Han continued. Xin Chao immediately humphed. You can report to me about whatever it is. Why do you have to skip over me to make your report to a higher official? Furthermore, is this map of yours accurate? It can't be that you guys simply drafted it carelessly just to go through the motions, right? Ling Han frowned and replied in displeasure. I am not that idle. You dare to quibble with me? Xin Chao demanded menacingly, and his eyes immediately became dangerous. Ling Han knew that the other man had a natural prejudice against students of saintly origin academy, but knowing it was one thing. Why was there any need for him to humble himself in front of the other man? He stated calmly, "Aren't you the one that is causing unnecessary trouble?" "How dare you!" Xin Chao shouted angrily and suddenly moved to grab out at Ling Han. He was a fifth secret monarch tier, and his strength was naturally world-shaking. Light of Tao blazed, as if he was a supreme overlord. Ling Han was very strong. When he had been at dividing 9 souls, he had been equivalent to a first secret immortal palace tier, and now that he had further advanced into the immortal palace tier, that was naturally equivalent to having formed his second mystery realm. But even if he was a monarch tier, that was only comparable to third secret, and there was still a very great gap between him and a fifth secret monarch tier. Taking it head on, that was only going to be suicidal. Ling Han used void space and manifested millions of himself. Though he had split out the 9 source powers of heaven and earth, the brand of the 9 source powers of heaven and earth had been left in his body, and the abilities he had grasped would not disappear. Instead, he could continue to deduce the secrets of the source powers through these brands. Boom! Xin Chao's grab completely missed its target. Yet, he only smirked coldly. That had only been a casual move of his. Yet Ling Han had already used a powerful move. What did that signify? In the outside world, it would not have much effect, but this was an independent zone. One could only expend the regulations that were locked in their body, and this meant that every person's battle prowess would be equivalent to a small pool. Once it was completely exhausted, they would be completely rendered useless. At present, Ling Han could dodge his attacks as much as possible, but how long could he continue dodging for? He moved mercilessly, wanting to push Ling Han to his limits as soon as possible. Chapter 2228 Battle. Chapter 2228 Battle. Xin Chao was really very strong. Every casual movement from him was lethal, possessing astonishingly strong might. A fifth secret monarch tier was really too powerful. If Ling Han had chosen to clash with Shen Chao head-on, he would have probably been severely injured and killed with a few strikes. However, he had once possessed 9 source powers of heaven and earth, and the first mystery realm that he had cultivated had been tempered with the power of time. Thus, his battle prowess far surpassed his cultivation level. At the very least, he was indeed numbingly powerful in terms of evasion and flight. Void space was used, and he formed countless manifestations, and even when Xin Chao used a wide-range lethal technique, destroying the entire void space in a single stroke, he still had the regulations of time. He slowed down the attacks that came towards him by 10,000 times, and then calmly escaped completely at ease. Even Xin Chao had to admit that he was impressed by Ling Han's abilities, but this only made his pride even more intense. He shot out blow after blow, determined to take Ling Han down. "I never thought that you are actually a monarch star," he said. "However, even as a monarch star, you have only come now. You have no view of the greater picture here. Even if such a monarch star became a 9th heaven celestial king, so what? You would only surrender when you encounter danger." His expression was menacing. Rather than having you turn around and cause harm to the celestial realm, it would be better to kill you here. His killing intent blazed, and his attacks became harsher. This time, he was really aiming to take Ling Han's life. Ling Han's expression was cold. Perhaps Xin Chao's intentions were really for the sake of the celestial realm. But what did this have to do with him? "You want to kill me, so don't tell me that I have to welcome it with a smile." He merely channeled the regulations of time and space, continuing to evade Xin Chao's attacks. The regulations of space were already very mysterious, and the regulations of time are superior to all other regulations. The use thereof was extremely simple, and that was slowing down or speeding up the flow of time in a small capacity or even freezing time. Though there were only 3 effects, each was extremely powerful in battle. If it could affect everything, Ling Han could kill even a celestial king. Shen Chao had also begun to greatly exhaust his energy. In any case, his cultivation level was higher than Ling Han's, and the regulations locked up in his body were definitely greater in amount than Ling Han. In that case, he only had to expend at a slightly slower rate than Ling Han, and it would definitely be Ling Han that would be completely exhausted of his regulations. This thought was very logical, but he would never have predicted that Ling Han still had a treasure like the Black Tower, so his power of regulation was endless. The two of them fought fiercely, but it was Shen Chao that was attacking on Ling Han, while Ling Han was endlessly evading. As time passed, more and more people returned. Seeing Ling Han battling fiercely with Shen Chao, they all stopped and watched while asking what was going on. Lu Zhen and Mei Hua related the happenings. The natives would all look disdainful, and thought that Ling Han should indeed be taught a lesson, while the other two disciples of the Saintly Origin Academy were secretly cheering Ling Han on. Because they were overwhelmed in numbers, they did not dare to voice their encouragement. However, the circumstances could not be any more clearer. How was a first secret supposed to match a fifth secret? What more when this fifth secret was a monarch tier at that? If it were not for the fact that he could not replenish his regulations here, which affected Shin Chao's performance, he would have long since won. Even so, Ling Han was still sustaining injuries continuously. Celestial blood scattered and landed on the mountain rock, turning the variety of rocks into dust. Of course, this was a deliberate move from Ling Han. If Shen Chao was not given a bit of the sweet taste of victory, why would he continue to battle? Another hour later, everyone had returned to their starting point and saw the fierce battle between Ling Han and Shen Chao. At this time, Shen Chao was also slightly anxious. They had already battled for so long, yet he still had not managed to take Ling Han down or completely exhaust Ling Han's energy. Though the latter was covered with injuries, and it seemed like he would collapse at the next blow, he always seemed to miraculously continue. Instead, the regulations in his body were decreasing further and further. Though he had cultivated 5 human body mystery realms, and the regulations that he could lock up in his body were astonishingly great in amount, there would definitely come an eventual end when there was only output and no input. By now, he was close to arriving at this end. "Everlasting world, strike of the Big Dipper!" he shouted loudly. After storing up energy for a long time, he blasted out a powerful attack. Suddenly, the skies were completely filled with golden blades that were formed from origin power. Regulations of metal entwined around them, and they swept out madly towards Ling Han. The range of this strike was extraordinarily wide, enshrouding the void space that Ling Han had unfolded completely, and Shin Chao was also boosting it with a great amount of regulations of metal, without thought of the costs. He was determined to break through the lockdown of Ling Han's regulations of time, and deliver a supremely powerful blow. Ling Han chuckled, and took the initiative to channel the indestructible heaven scroll. Xiao, xiao, xiao! Endless golden blades descended, practically stabbing into the entirety of the whole valley. Everyone was astonished. When this blow fell, was there any possibility that Ling Han would still be alive? The regulations here were incompatible with the celestial realm. Thus, the golden blades formed by the regulations soon crumbled and vanished, but dust was still blown around the area, scraps of rock shooting out. The might of this attack was really too powerful. However, after the dust cleared, everyone showed expressions of shock. That was because Ling Han was still standing firmly. Though there were traces of blood on him, the aura he exuded was incredibly dominant, and there was a boundless rage boiling. A strange feeling rose up in everyone's hearts, making them feel an urge of wanting to kneel down and worship Ling Han. Ling Han opened his eyes. There was blood at the corners of his eyes, yet it did not affect his domineering air in the slightest. Instead, it made his gaze become even harsher and firmer. He looked at Shin Chao, his fighting spirit soaring into a song that crackled loudly. Even if Xin Chao was a monarch tier, so what? Faced with this kind of Ling Han, his heart was also beginning to chill. And what was worse, there had already been less of his power of regulation in the first place, and now, after unleashing such a powerful move, the power of regulation in his body was already close to empty, and his battle prowess would definitely be severely discounted. More importantly, how had Ling Han been able to sustain that strike from him? Furthermore, was his body a bottomless pit, actually having been able to lock up so much power of regulations? It's my turn now. Ling Han spat out each word one by one. Xiao, he took a step, and his body immediately sped up. Instantly, he appeared in front of Xin Chao, shooting out a powerful punch. Humph! Xin Chao was unafraid. Even if his battle prowess had declined greatly, he was still superior to Ling Han. Previously, Ling Han had been able to contend with him, not because he was all that powerful, but rather because he was constantly dodging, and now he was confronting him forcefully. Wasn't that just courting death? Thinking that his regulations were close to exhaustion, he thought that he could turn his defeat around into a victory. Too naive. The two people clashed furiously. Pum, pum, pum. As expected, it was still Xin Chao that was stronger. Ling Han would be throwing up blood with every blow, but he merely channeled the regulations of wood of the indestructible Heaven Scroll, and his injuries would be rapidly recovering. However, Xin Chao was too strong, so strong that his rate of recovery was completely unable to keep up. Very soon, he was battered all over, exposing eerily white bones. However, Ling Han merely channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid, and his body immediately recovered to its prime condition. He looked at Xin Chao coldly. He only felt a soaring fighting spirit, without the slightest bit of emotion. This time, Xin Chao was really scared. Are you a fuck undead monster? Having sustained such serious injuries, you can still manage to remain standing, and can actually unleash such wild fighting spirit at that. What can you be if not a monster? Ling Han did not speak. Xiao, he attacked once more, and his fists launched a fierce barrage, using the Fists of Fury. This time he was really mad with fury, and had entered completely into the intent realm of Fists of Fury. Images of his fists filled the skies. Fight, 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 fight. He would fight until he pierced open the skies, destroyed the earth, and fought to his heart's content. Chapter 2229. Beat you to your heart's content. Chapter 2229. Beat you to your heart's content. Xin Chao could no longer endure. Originally, he had already been close to the end of his line. Previously, though he had been able to counter aggressively, that had only been short-lived. The regulations in his body were already exhausted completely, and his battle prowess had fallen down to rock bottom. Now, to say nothing that it was Ling Han, any random severing mundane tier would have been able to suppress Xin Chao easily. Pum! Ling Han's fist slammed into Xin Chao's face, instantly causing a nosebleed. However, Ling Han had obviously controlled his force. Otherwise, it would not have been a matter of a little bloodshed with this punch, but rather his whole head would have explodida, was not Ling Han, who had a tough physique. Aren't you very arrogant? Ling Han slammed another punch over. Go on then, continue being arrogant. He would follow each word with a punch, and Xin Chao's whole face was immediately bruised and battered all over, quickly swelling to the size of a pig's head. Did I trifle with you? No. Yet you are so determined to come and trifle with me. Fuck, are you wretched? I have always had one way of dealing with wretches, and that is to beat them up. His punches did not end, and the sounds of cracking bones were soon heard from Xin Chao's body as Ling Han had broken his bones, or even smashed them to bits. Ah, Xin Chao could only moan in agony, who made it a rule that a monarch tier could not cry in pain when he was being beaten. The natives were all furious and summoned their respective weapons, aimed straight at Ling Han. "Let him go," they demanded coldly. However, even the strongest elite among them was only a fourth secret Emperor tier. After all, how could there be so many monarch tiers? Even in this militaristic battlefield, there could not possibly be so many. One of Ling Han's hands gripped the front of Xin Chao's robes as he surveyed the masses. The blood on his face had not been wiped off, and as his cold eyes swept over them, everyone felt a chill rise up from the depths of their heart, and they actually stepped back continuously. This drove the natives into a rage due to humiliation. They dared to rush up and fight any of the foreign race they saw. Since childhood, they had seen many assaults on the city that the foreign race launched. When was it that no masses of dead people fell from Clear Heaven Pass, as if it was a shower of rain? Even this did not make them feel afraid. Yet they had stepped back with just a glance from Ling Han. How could they bear with that? "Let's go." They stepped forwards again and charged onwards, unleashing a united offensive against Ling Han. Ling Han smirked coldly. Using Xin Chao as a weapon, he flung him around in a mad sweep towards them. Everyone refrained from attacking, fearing that harm would come to Xin Chao. They did not dare to attack too strongly at all. "You are too shameless. You're not a man." The natives were all shouting, all of them stomping in fury, and also trying to spur Ling Han on so that he could release Shen Chao and battle them himself. How could Ling Han possibly pay them any regard? He merely waved Shen Chao around to attack them, and his battle prowess was indeed far surpassing all the others. Aside from that fourth secret Emperor tier, who else could withstand a few blows from him? Pung, 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 figures danced in the skies one after another. They had been kicked or sent flying out by Ling Han, all sprawling out on the ground. Finally, only that fourth secret Emperor tier was left, and Ling Han used the regulations of time to bind him. The flow of time had slowed down over 10,000 times, so he could only watch helplessly as Ling Han slammed Xin Chao into him. Pa! The two of them were instantly battered and tangled up together. Mei Hua, Lu Zhen, and the other disciples of the academy were all looking at Ling Han with incredible admiration. This was too amazing, and they were completely astounded. He was just a first secret, yet could even defeat a fifth secret monarch tier. His strength was indescribable. They also could not understand why Ling Han's power seemed to be endless. He could not be replenished with regulations here. Even a fifth secret monarch tier had been defeated. Then, was there anyone that could be Ling Han's match in this heaven and earth? Half a day later, everyone finally regained consciousness one after another, moaning endlessly as they lay on the ground. Xin Chao had also awakened. He did not make any sound, and would occasionally glance at Ling Han when he wasn't paying attention, his expression filled with puzzlement. In terms of true battle prowess, he was definitely superior to Ling Han, but the power of regulation that Ling Han could use was endless, and he actually managed to exhaust him to defeat. Of course, if it were not for the fact that Ling Han had an amazing movement technique and was skilled in the regulations of time and also had an astonishing recovery ability, he would not have been able to last so long either. But all these factors added together turned Ling Han into a miracle, a first secret who had defeated him, who was a fifth secret. Monarch stars were indeed very impressive, but if he was only a first secret, he could match a third secret monarch tier at most. He definitely could not match a fifth secret monarch star. This young man was practically a freak. Ling Han coughed and said, "Since everyone is conscious now, let's go back." Everyone remained silent. They had been defeated even when they had an overwhelming advantage in numbers and strength. These natives had all become cocks that had lost a fight, losing all of their arrogance completely. Meanwhile, Lu Zhen and the others were all incredibly excited. Since they entered the 17th camp, the natives had treated them with extreme contempt, and they had even suffered some losses. Now that Ling Han had shown his might here, the natives had lost all their temper, which had naturally vented some of their frustrations. Ling Han led the way, and they set out, heading towards Clear Heaven Pass. A long while later, they had finally walked out of the neutral zone. At this time, Nyahashan and the other 19 teams had long since been waiting here. Seeing everyone looking crestfallen, as if they had suffered some serious blow, the others asked them what had happened, and thought that they had encountered an attack from some super powerful monster. Han Lin, I will smash you into pulp. Xin Chao's body shook, and the light of regulations returned. He had recovered his strength. This place was already the territory of the celestial realm, and he could again channel the power of regulation, so he had completely recovered to his prime condition. Ling Han ignored him completely and directly walked towards Nyahashan. You are courting death. Xin Chao roared furiously and set off in hot pursuit of Ling Han, sending out a punch. Whoa! His movements suddenly stopped, as if an invisible power had completely taken control of his body. Nyahashan showed a hint of displeasure in his expression, and he demanded, as the team leader and a 5th secret monarch tier, you think you can bully your teammates? It was he that had moved to subdue Xin Chao. It was naturally completely effortless, since it was an ascending origin tier elite that had moved. Xin Chao's expression was completely defiant. Thus, he was also glaring angrily at Nyahashan. He was a 5th secret monarch tier, and once he advanced into ascending origin tier, his battle prowess would not be inferior to Nyahashan's. Thus, he did not hold much respect for Nyahashan. Not too long after, he would be able to advance into this level as well, and become his equal, or even emerge completely superior over the other. Step down. Nyahashan humphed lightly, his one eye exuding a boundless chill. Xin Chao's face paled, and he involuntarily stepped backwards. There was a wide gulf between the Immortal Palace tier and Ascending Origin tier. Without forming 11 mystery realms, how could he possibly be the man's match? Meanwhile, Ling Han said, Lord Nya, I discovered a strange place within the valley. He related the situation that he had experienced, including that eye that had vanished in a flash. Hearing him say these words, a considerable number of people scoffed mockingly. What a joke! How could there be an ascending origin tier existence in the neutral zone? It should be known that even a 9th heaven celestial king could not possibly enter within, as they would be crushed forcefully by the majestic power of heaven and earth. Could ascending origin tier compare with 9th heaven celestial king tier? Thus, after Nyahashan heard this, he merely nodded carelessly and said, I will make further investigations. Yet, he had absolutely no intentions of pursuing the matter. It was clear from his expression. Waving a hand, he commanded that they were to return. Ling Han was going to speak further, yet Nyahashan had absolutely no intention of paying him any regard, so he could only dismiss that thought. After returning to the campsite, Ling Han began to study the celestial medicine he had obtained and that creature. Chapter 2230, Docking Pay. Chapter 2230, Docking Pay. It was possible that the neutral zone was presently nurturing an ascending origin tier creature. For Clear Heaven Pass, this matter was actually not all that important because what was an ascending origin tier worth? Any random celestial king would be able to crush it to dust. Hence, Ling Han thought for a moment and did not waste time on this matter. After all, nothing would happen as long as he was careful. Moreover, if that creature could emerge, it meant that the neutral zone would be able to admit ascending origin tier power. Then the celestial realm would also be able to allow the entry of ascending origin tier powerhouses, and they could suppress it as well. With this in mind, Ling Han decided to set the matter aside for no off course. He was not going to give it up so easily. He was studying that celestial medicine and strange creature inside the Black Tower. The neutral zone was indeed strange. Celestial medicines did not grow in the ground, but rather in the bodies of living creatures. Hold on, is this a new form of life? Ling Han suddenly paused. The celestial medicine and fierce beast coexisted in one body. As expected, only a new heaven and earth could give rise to such a creature. Still, what is the use of this celestial medicine? Ling Han took a fruit and consumed it. Suddenly, an expansive power surged in his body. There was a slightly familiar side to it, but it also had an extremely evil side, but the larger composition was a never-before-seen powerful energy. He felt it carefully. The two realms clash, but the regulations have not completely merged. Thus, one part of this celestial medicine is the regulations of the celestial realm, and one part belongs to the foreign realm. But more than that, it is made up of completely new regulations that were produced after the two merged. If I have enough celestial medicines, I may be able to deduce some regulations of the foreign realm. Regulations were not universal in use, but the power was the same. This celestial medicine could still boost the level of Ling Han's origin power, pushing it to a higher level. He consumed the remaining celestial fruits and experienced the effects carefully. In terms of overall level of origin power, he had reached the heights of middle stage for secret, but his comprehension of regulations was still in the early stage and had practically not moved further. After all, every further step in the immortal palace tier would need far, far too much time. I'll need to get some more celestial medicines, Ling Han mumbled. He was very intrigued by that neutral zone and wanted even more to find out what kind of creature was being nurtured underground. And it just so happened that after this mission, Nyahashan had also assigned them many days of vacation, allowing them to move freely. Ling Han thus decided to call the Rain Emperor and the others, and venture once more into the neutral zone. He had not yet set out when a great amount of cultivation resources had been sent to the campsite, and they were distributed by the respective team leaders. Chunlong, Sui Bo, Shen Chao called the names of his teammates one after another to distribute the resources. Lu Zhen. The resources he had previously distributed were all to the natives, and Ling Han and the others were the last 5 to be called. Lu Zhen stepped forwards. When Xin Chao tossed him a spatial god tool, he inspected it and his expression instantly changed as he demanded, "Why is there only just this bit of cultivation resources? What is it? Complaining that it is too little?" Xin Chao glanced at him, a hint of disdain in his expression. He. The other native team members all walked over, arms crossed over their chests as malicious smiles covered their faces. Lu Jin opened his mouth to say something, but in the end he did not speak and simply stepped aside. Xin Chao's lips twitched slightly, looking extremely contemptuous, and then called out, "Mei Hua." Mei Hua stepped forwards, and after he took a spatial god tool, he similarly looked outraged. This is only 10% of the last distribution. So what? Xin Chao looked at him coldly, his eyes fierce, looking like a fierce tiger that had its eye on prey. Mei Hua was furious, but he dared not speak. He merely clenched his fists and stepped back. The remaining 2 were the same as well. The cultivation resources they obtained were pitifully little, yet they did not dare raise their objections towards Xin Chao. Han Lin. Xin Chao finally called out Ling Han's name. Ling Han walked forwards. Shua. Xin Chao tossed out a spatial god tool. Ling Han grabbed it and did a sweep with his divine sense. Involuntarily, he smirked coldly. Amazing, there were just 2 starstones. And this was the cultivation resources he deserved? Even the stupidest person would know that could not be possible. Shen Chao had to have docked his pay. He flicked his finger and said, "Previously, I quite admired you guys, bleeding and sacrificing for the many generations of Celestial Realm. However, now I realize that I have been admiring the wrong people." Ling Han glanced over the natives. "Those who deserve admiration are your ancestors, and not trash like you. What difference do you people have compared to those outside now? You would only be repelling others, without thinking of the bigger picture at all. With you guys like this, we're supposed to depend on you to guard the borders." That is really the biggest joke ever heard." When these words fell, the expressions of the natives immediately changed in unison. It was not just this small team. Members of the other teams also walked over, glaring at Ling Han, their expressions fierce. When our ancestors were bleeding and sacrificing for the celestial realm, who knows where you were still drinking milk? What right do you have to fault us? What have you done for the celestial realm? The fact that you can stand here today was paid for with the blood and lives of our ancestors. The natives were all calling out loudly, rebuking Ling Han harshly. Ling Han sneered and said, "You are all right in what you say. Your ancestors do indeed deserve respect. But what does that have to do with you guys? You are all talking on and on about your ancestors. But does that have anything to do with you?" Everyone couldn't help but be silenced. At this moment, they actually couldn't find words to refute Ling Han. All this while they had always despised those who came from outside, and thought that the latter had enjoyed the peace that they had worked for. But in truth, at present, they indeed had not been doing anything worthwhile, and were just simply continuously pushing others aside. So what? Xin Chao simply chose to be arrogant. Our ancestors have sacrificed so much, so don't tell me that we should not enjoy better treatment. And this is the excuse you are using to dock my cultivation resources. Ling Han laughed loudly. You are truly shameless to the extreme. Do you want to die? Xin Chao looked at Ling Han coldly, his killing intent blazing. Hee, isn't the lesson I taught you the last time enough? Ling Han asked with a grin. Instantly, Xin Chao's whole face was flushed red. Losing to Ling Han could be considered an extreme humiliation for him. He was a 5th secret monarch tier, and he had actually lost to a mere 1st secret. Even if the latter was a monarch star, he was not the slightest bit comforted. Now he had already become a laughing matter. Even those that he had usually looked down on would dare to glance at him in contempt, and he could only leave with a bowed head. All this was because of Ling Han. Are you seeking death? Xin Chao's eyes were spitting fire. Brother Chao, this is the barracks, someone reminded him. If he made a move here, no matter who was in the right, they would all be punished severely. Xin Chao clenched his fists tightly, using so much force that his fingernails had sunk into his flesh, drops of blood seeping out. He forcibly suppressed the urge to commit murder and exclaimed, Han Lin, make sure you don't let me see you outside. The threat in these words could not be more obvious. As long as Ling Han dared to leave Clear Heaven Pass, he would dare deliver a fatal strike. Ling Han laughed loudly and crooked a finger at Xin Chao. Come on then, make your move. If you don't, you'd be my grandson. You're seeking death. At first, Xin Chao had already forcefully suppressed his fury, but how could he hold up to such provocation from Ling Han? Immediately, he raised his hands and blasted towards Ling Han. Pum! Everyone felt their vision blur, and Xin Chao was already sent flying back heavily. Fuck! What kind of magic was going on here? Chapter 2231 Still Outmatched. Chapter 2231 Still Outmatched. Xin Chao was a 5th secret monarch tier, and his strength definitely surpassed or even overwhelmed Ling Han's. This was publicly acknowledged. Previously, he had been no match for Ling Han, but that was because he had been restricted by the environment. He could not get any replenishment of power of regulation within the neutral zone, but Ling Han was extremely freakish. The regulations locked in his body seemed endless, and this had led to Xin Chao's terrible defeat. But this was the soldiers' camp in the territory of the Celestial Realm. Why had Xin Chao been sent flying with a single strike from Ling Han? Ling Han withdrew his hand and stated calmly, You are still no match for me. How about it? Want another try? He secretly calmed the throbbing of his chest. He had been able to send Xin Chao flying with a single strike because he had used the Dragon Chi of Dragon transformation technique. Cultivating dragon transformation technique could allow a cultivator to reach the heights of an immortal dragon. But what Ling Han valued the most was the subsidiary benefits of dragon transformation technique could cultivate dragon chi, store up power, and maybe even form an immortal dragon when it reached the level of celestial king tier. This allowed him to instantly burst out with 10 times or even 100 times his own strength, and this was what had sent Xin Chao flying with a single blow. But the downside was it could not be maintained for long, and was a technique that belonged completely to the category of expenditure. With Ling Han's present situation, he would be able to strike 4 to 5 times at most. And Shen Chao was truly a 5th secret monarch tier. This strike had merely sent him backwards, and did not inflict severe injury on him. In fact, it only caused the corners of his lips to bleed slightly. After all, the gap between their cultivation levels was clear. Being able to send Shen Chao backwards with a head-on strike was already an impressive accomplishment. Yet Shen Chao did not know this. He only looked at Ling Han with eyes filled with shock and suspicion, both astonished and defiant. Being outmatched by Ling Han in the neutral zone, he could not say anything. After all, this was not because his battle prowess was inferior. However, he was still outmatched even now. This was a challenge to his self-confidence that he had never experienced before. He was wavering. What if he battled again, and he was still no match for Ling Han? Previously, it had only been seen by the members of a team, but now it was an entire camp. The extent of humiliation naturally would be on a completely different level. I am not going to believe this. He spat out each word, his confidence reignited. Ling Han merely chuckled and crossed his arms behind his back. A monarch tier would not give up so easily, of course, even if Xin Chao had already been defeated by him once, and had just suffered a slight loss only moments ago. Come. He crooked a finger at him. Xin Chao concentrated. Xiao, he suddenly streaked out, his right hand clenched into a fist, which he waved out. Boom! Like a battle dragon rambling through the heavens, it exploded with a terrifying might. Ling Han did not move or panic. When this attack was close to blasting him, he suddenly shot out a punch. His stamina had long since soared to the level of the ascending origin tier. Though pure power could not possibly increase his battle prowess too much, the better his stamina, the faster the rate that Ling Han could attack at. Thus, though his attack came later, it was this punch that landed first, coming at an extraordinarily and incredibly fast rate. Pum! This punch greeted Xin Chao's incoming fist. The two fists collided, and an astonishing light instantly burst out. Then, Xin Chao, whose body had been moving forwards, came to an abrupt stop and bounced backwards at an even faster speed. Wah! Xin Chao dropped onto the ground, and with a slight tremor of his body, he spat out a mouthful of blood, but his vitality was blazing hotly. Though his internal organs had been shaken, his 5 organs had already been cultivated into mystery realms. A small tremor naturally could not harm him at all. However, his 6 organs had not been tempered yet, and that was why he had been slightly wounded with the tremor. For him, this blow could not be considered as even causing any harm at all. Yet others did not think that way. They were all exclaiming in shock, all of them unable to believe their eyes. Xin Chao was still no match for Ling Han. Crazy, this was really crazy. A 5th secret monarch tier actually could not match a 1st secret. Ling Han's expression was calm, and he once again crooked a finger at him and said, "Hand over the cultivation resources that I should have gotten. Also, those that the 4 of them should have as well." He pointed at Mei Hua and the other people who had come from Saintly Origin Academy. Xin Chao was defiant. Why was he still no match for Ling Han? He obviously had not sensed that Ling Han had used any precious treasure, and this should be power that belonged solely to Ling Han. But was a monarch star really that powerful? Xin Chao hesitated and decided to make a final attempt. He thought that Ling Han had surely used some kind of secret technique which allowed his battle prowess to soar for a short period of time. but it had to have a limited use. "Ah!" he roared, and slammed towards Ling Han like a primitive beast. Ling Han humphed, and used fists of fury, bursting out with a stronger attack. Pung! Xin Chao was sent flying for the third time, and crashed heavily into a stone pillar. Then, pung, pang, pang, he finally stopped after he broke through 7 stone pillars in one go. Blood was dripping from the corners of his lips. This time his injuries were finally slightly serious. These were still superficial wounds, and did not affect his battle prowess at all, but Xin Chao could not bring himself to attack again. To have failed 3 times in succession, wasn't that enough already? Furthermore, the aura that Ling Han was presently exuding had not weakened or declined in the slightest, which meant that he still could execute a few more such powerful attacks. Xin Chao truly had no wish to seek his own humiliation further. He humphed and then tossed 5 spatial god tools onto the ground. Then he turned around and left. He truly did not have any further face to stay here any longer. The area was incredibly silent. Xin Chao was a 5th secret monarch tier, and was more or less the top elite in this camp, yet even he had been defeated by Ling Han. In that case, who else could be a match for this outsider? Ling Han, no, Han Lin, so awesome. Hunyo clapped her hands. She ran over, her arms flung around Ling Han's neck, hanging from him like she was a big monkey. Ling Han smiled, and his right hand grabbed at the empty air. The 5 spatial god tools on the ground all fell into his hands. Then he tossed 4 of them to Mei Hua and the others. Seeing this scene, the students of Saintly Origin Academy all looked motivated. Outside, all of them were prodigies, but after coming here they were treated with extreme contempt by the locals. Yet they indeed were much weaker in cultivation level, and were completely no match for the locals, so they could only lower their heads and behave. Now, with Ling Han striking out strongly, he had won their pride back, which naturally won their respect as well. Han Lin, Han Lin, Han Lin. It was unknown who was the first to yell out, but very soon it developed into a tsunami wave of cries. Ling Han smiled slightly. Actually, there was another member of his alliance in the 17th camp, and that was Chang Zixin. However, because he had presently altered his appearance and aura, the latter did not have the slightest notion that they were one and the same. Hunyo, the Empress, and the others had also altered their appearance and aura slightly. Let's go. He, the Empress, Hunyo, the Rain Emperor, and Bewitching Maiden Rose set out on their way, heading towards the neutral zone. After they had exited the camp, Nya Heshan crossed his arms behind his back, looking at their receding backs from the distance. Lord Eternity has a high opinion of these few people, yet did not directly recruit them as his subordinates to further nurture them. Instead, he had them enlisted here to be polished further, and even instructed that I am not to interfere. It looks unreasonable, yet is also considered to be showing them more care. If that was not the case, as a great 9th heaven celestial king, how could he be so idle? Sigh, these little guys are really getting more and more restless. Why is it that they don't realize that with the sensitivity of the divine sense of celestial kings, how could every single thing that happened here possibly deceive them? With no sense of propriety, only fighting for favor and pushing out others, how could this kind of person be favored by the celestial kings? Ling Han and his group soon arrived at the outer circle of the neutral zone. This place was actually very dangerous. It would be the territory of the foreign realm after they passed through here, and the foreign realm would occasionally circle around the neutral zone to launch attacks against the celestial realm. This place is equivalent to a newly created heaven and earth. If our luck is good, we may be able to gain astonishing benefits. Chapter 2232, Poison Pills. Chapter 2232, Poison Pills. Ling Han and the others entered into the neutral zone. Thankfully, because this zone was continuously widening, being close to covering the connecting point between the 2 realms, The foreign realm rarely launched offensives in the recent Dacenly. Those below the ascending origin tier could come over here. So what was the point of fighting? The foreign realm had only brought up the motion of conducting a spar among the immortal palace tiers of the present generation, but the celestial realm had not agreed, fearing that this would again end in a terrible and serious humiliation. In any case, they could not do as they liked, could they? After entering into the neutral zone, the 5 of them relaxed. The regulations of this place were not recognized by the celestial realm. Even if a celestial king had come, he would very quickly become useless. Thus, they had completely no need to worry that the divine sense of celestial kings would extend inside here. That was an absolute impossibility. Their goal was to do a sweep of the creatures here. With the heaven and earth newly created, every creature was actually a supreme treasure. Ling Han and his group had always had good luck. Very soon, they encountered a creature that was unique to this place, one that had reached the immortal palace tier at that. The 5 of them charged forwards and dealt with this creature that looked like a combination of a deer and goat in a few strokes. When they dissected it, as expected, there was a fruit tree being nurtured in its heart, and the tree had borne 3 large fruits, emanating a refreshing fragrance. Strange, the time this area has been formed should not reach 100 years. So how could such a powerful creature be nurtured here, as well as an astonishingly aged celestial medicine? The Rain Emperor looked at all corners of the heaven and earth, looking puzzled. Ling Han thought for a moment, and then said, "The secrets of the heaven and earth are not something that the present us can perceive." The Empress nodded and remarked, "The regulations are subsidiary to the heaven and earth. Even the most mysterious regulations of time are only serving the heaven and earth. In that case, it would not be strange that creatures that are aged hundreds of millions of years old could appear here when only a short 100 years has passed in the outside world." Ling Han stowed this creature away. He had tried it. Consuming the flesh of this kind of beast could slightly replenish the power of regulation that had been expended. For him, this little bit of use was not effective, but for others it would be of astonishing help. Ling Han understood it with some thought. It was through exhaustion that he had defeated Xin Chao. The flesh of this beast could replenish regulations, and it meant that others would be able to replicate his miracle. However, the power of regulation in the meat is limited and could never compare to the energy stored in the Black Tower. Ling Han scrambled his brains. "But I can think of some way and turn this meat into an alchemical pill, increasing its effects of recovery." No. Hunyo hurriedly grabbed Ling Han's thigh. "Nyo wants to eat meat. Nyo doesn't want to take alchemical pills. Bitter." Ling Han didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Aside from eating, what else did this little girl think about? Play, of course, Hunyo declared self-righteously. Ling Han and the others were amused. With such a high natural talent in cultivation, yet having a disposition so playful and voracious, she was probably the only one like this in this whole world. This was practically an exorbitant waste. If this little girl had been willing to spare more effort on cultivation, her accomplishments definitely would not have been limited to what she'd thus achieved. The 5 of them continued their journey, doing a sweep their whole way. However, there were pitifully few living creatures here, and there wasn't even a blade of grass on the barren ground. Now, the heaven and earth here were newly created. Each blade of grass and each tree were all sources and were precious treasures. Of course, the creatures here were strange. It might be that they were all hybrids of animal and plant, and pure plants could not possibly appear. They swept onwards continuously for a month, and finally decided to return. Their leave was close to ending, and Yaheshan would have a new mission to assign to them. However, before they returned, Ling Han ventured again to that valley from before, wanting to check on that creature underground. But he did not dare release his divine sense, because he discovered that the creature had strengthened a bit merely by slightly probing the surface. As expected, this heaven and earth was presently rapidly perfecting its regulations, and a stronger creature was about to come into existence in this space. Can we kill this creature? Ling Han and the others were all thinking this. Every single creature here was equivalent to a source beast, and even had its own celestial medicine, which had astonishing effects. Though a market had not yet formed at present, they were sure that as more people discovered the use of these creatures, their corpses and the celestial medicine in their heart would go for astronomical prices. By then, it would be difficult to hunt these creatures. This place had no lack of prodigies and elites. Hence, Ling Han and his group wanted to take advantage of this opening when the trend had not yet begun to take down that great ascending origin tier beast as soon as possible. The problem was that they were all only immortal palace tiers, so wasn't having designs on a great beast of ascending origin tier delusional. It is not that we are completely without a chance. The Empress planned in advance. This great beast has a very large weakness. It is kind of being suppressed already and cannot move the slightest bit. At the very least, it cannot leave there. That's right. Ling Han nodded. He pondered. Right, though even our battle prowess combined together cannot match an ascending origin tier. I am a 4-star alchemist, so I can concoct 4-star alchemical pills. And 4-star alchemical pills are not just limited to tonics, but also poison. He had never studied poison before because there was absolutely no need, but now he had that kind of idea. After returning to camp, Ling Han immediately entered into the Black Tower and began to concoct poison pills. Only 2 days had passed in the outside world, and Ling Han had already found a suitable poison. Thinking of how he had to conceal its aura, he could disguise it as an excellent celestial pill. However, before he had the time to purchase the ingredients for the poison, the 17th camp mobilized completely, heading to a location for training. This time, it was not the neutral zone. Instead, they retreated to the desolate plains behind Clear Heaven Pass. This was the second battlefield between the Celestial Realm and Foreign Realm. A great many elites of both Celestial Realm and Foreign Realm had died in battle here, and after countless years, the number of elites who had died was chilling. Their mission was very simple, and that was to roam around in the desolate plains. The time assigned was 1 month. Ling Han had walked over this desolate plain before, and knew that this was actually quite a frightening place. That powerful aura and pressure it exuded were really too strong. Moreover, they were not taking the same route they had taken before. Previously, the path that Ling Han and the others had walked had actually been deliberately opened up, and a great number of corpses of elites had already been moved away. But the place that they now had to roam was a region that had not been dealt with at all. Nia Hashan still divided them into 20 small teams, and they were to move separately. Shen Chao humphed and moved independently while bringing the 6 natives with him, ignoring Ling Han and the other disciples of Saintly Origin Academy altogether. Ling Han was also pleased with the situation. What the eye didn't see, the heart didn't fret over. With that kind of havoc, the conflict between the natives and outsiders would probably become bigger and bigger. He couldn't help but sigh. The invasion of the Foreign Realm was close at hand, but there were still a great many people that had focused their energy on internal strife, wasting time and energy for nothing. However, he smiled bitterly. The most useless should be those 3 heavenly venerates, right? Otherwise, if they were willing to interfere, the fighting of Clear Heaven Pass would definitely not be so critical. If he could recall how he had been the victim of an attack from the Jew Heavenly Venerate the time stream, he would probably feel even sicker at heart. He was not in a good mood, and was silent as he walked ahead of them, and Mei Hua and the others naturally would not dare say anything, either, so the atmosphere appeared extremely depressed. While they were walking, they heard cracking sounds ring out. A white skeleton had popped up out of who knew where. It was 9 meters tall and strangely shaped. Words could not describe its exact appearance. Chapter 2233 Failure. Chapter 2233. Failure. This white skeleton. It seemed like the Creator's hand had slipped when he had been creating new beings. He had wanted to remold this thing that had been half-created, but after he kneaded it a few times he changed his mind again and decided to give it life. Thus it was ugly and strange, and words could not be used to describe just what exactly it looked like. Ling Han swept an eye over it. The bones of the skeleton were very disorderly, clearly having been pieced together from the bones of a considerable number of different corpses. "Be careful, young Master Han," Lu Zhan reminded him. "These skeletons are manifested from the corpses of elites from the foreign realm, and have a sliver of intent that has not been destroyed by the heaven and earth yet. Though those with higher cultivation levels have already been wiped out by the celestial kings, they are still relatively powerful." Ling Han nodded. Since Nye Heshan assigned them to train here, he was sure that this skeleton should reach the immortal palace tier. Rather, there would be immortal palace tier skeletons appearing. This monster was not a living creature, and its cultivation level could not be distinguished. Only in battle would they find out the exact details of its battle prowess. Ling Han strode forwards, approaching the skeleton. Hiss, hiss. This skeleton released a strange sound, then suddenly waved its arm, and bones about 3 meters long slammed towards Ling Han. Ling Han moved. Pang! He exchanged a blow with the skeleton. That skeleton's figure was immediately sent backwards from the impact, and Ling Han's body trembled, feeling a sharp stabbing pain in his eyes, as if blood was about to drip from his eyes. He couldn't help but feel surprised. The battle prowess of the skeleton was actually not very strong, only slightly stronger than Fourth Secret. But when it struck, its attacks carried the violent air of this place, dealing a considerable blow to Ling Han's divine sense. No wonder Nye Heshan had told them to come train here. It would indeed be very effective for training purposes here. The white skeleton boasted extreme toughness and immediately brandished another arm to slam Ling Han. Ling Han leaped and struck consecutively, endlessly barraging the white skeleton. Pung, pung, pung! Under his endless wave of attacks, multiple cracks appeared on the bones on the skeleton, just like a spider's web. Quang! With another heavy punch, the skeleton finally crumbled, its bones falling all over the ground. Yet Ling Han immediately fell into a seated position. Though he had gained victory, the aura that the skeleton had carried in its attacks was endlessly blasting towards him. Some had already entered his body and was presently causing havoc within. He had to expel it immediately, or it would become a huge problem. It took him a day and a night to finally expel this murderous aura from within his body. This was not the regulation of slaughter, but rather the defiance, anger, and other emotions left by cultivators of the foreign realm after their death. It could be fatal. Ling Han wiped away the sweat on his forehead, yet discovered to his surprise that his cultivation level had actually increased slightly in just this one day and night. At first he was confused, but then realization dawned on him. These elites of the foreign realm were indeed extremely strong, concealing great power in their bodies. Even after death, this power had not completely dispersed and ground by the heaven and earth here. This power had become something that could be absorbed by the cultivators of this realm. However, it was not just anyone who could easily absorb this power. It also carried the murderous aura of elites from the foreign realm within, and one had to be able to bear the barrage of this murderous aura to be able to absorb this power. As much as possible, kill these skeletons. It will be very beneficial, Ling Han said. Mei Hua and the others all nodded. Actually, they had long since known that killing the skeletons here would be very beneficial, but they had been following Xin Chao's lead previously, so what chance would they have had to move? Any rare skeleton they encountered would be divided among the natives. They continued onwards, and their luck wasn't too bad. Less than half a day later, they encountered another skeleton, and this one was an Earth Soul Tier at that. This kind of skeleton contained too little power within them, and Ling Han couldn't be bothered, so he simply had Mei Hua and the others move instead. They successfully destroyed the skeleton and obtained the benefits within. Ling Han laid out a formation around them, and then left by himself to search for new skeletal monsters. In this 1 month, he had destroyed 14 skeletons in total, but there were only 8 among them that were at the Immortal Palace tier, while the other 6 were dividing soul tiers. At first, Ling Han had not wanted to kill them, but these skeletons kept bothering him, so he could only move to kill all of them. It was better than nothing, and he might as well take them. His cultivation level had also increased visibly, reaching the middle stage of the first secret. This kind of progress rate in the Immortal Palace tier could be considered astonishingly rapid. He returned to meet up with the rest. When all members of the 17th camp had arrived, whether it was Hunyo, the Rain Emperor, the Empress, or the others, they had all improved clearly. Unfortunately, there were limited numbers of skeletons here, and they needed a very long time before they would be nurtured back into existence again, while there were too many people from Clear Heaven Pass, so they needed to take their turns in batches. It was said that only a few limited people had the privilege to endlessly train in this place. For example, Ji Wuming, Shi Chanzi, Hong Huang, and Jialan, the 4 supreme monarch tiers from the Saintly Origin Academy, as well as the 2 monarch stars from the borders, Ali Na and Xing Qinyue. Logically, Ling Han and the Rain Emperor should also be able to get such treatment, but the Eternity Celestial King, who had previously said that he would take care of them, seemed to have forgotten them completely, and they could only cultivate just like the others, which restricted the progress rate of their cultivation level. Would a Celestial King be forgetful? Probably not. In that case, the fact that the Eternity Celestial King had not raised the positions of the 2 of them should have some other meaning. The poison has finally been completed. Ling Han smiled slightly. He, the Empress, and the others entered once more into the neutral zone and began to release the poison from that cave mouth. However, on the outside, these 7 poison pills were all shining brilliantly, filled with a refreshing fragrance, appearing completely like celestial pills. To disguise the effects of the poison pills, Ling Han had really gone to much effort. We must succeed. I spent countless of my star stones on this. Ling Han felt a slight heartache. Even if it was poison pills, they were still 4-star pills, so their cost was naturally extremely high. Ling Han threw the poison pills in, and as a sucking force surged out, the 7 poison pills were immediately sucked into the cave, instantly disappearing without a trace. The 5 of them then sat beside this cave, waiting for the poison to take effect. However, the ground suddenly trembled after a while, as if an earthquake was happening. Yet the 5 of them did not panic, but were instead overjoyed. This meant that the poison pills had taken effect, and that was why that powerful existence would be rampaging around. It was close to death. However, after another while, the tremor stopped and a frightening aura surged out of the cave mouth, filled with vitality and shockingly strong. Oh no, not only did the monster not die, it has instead become even stronger. Could it be a venomous beast that does not fear poison, but would instead turn poison into its own power and increase its cultivation level? Ling Han and the others were all astounded. This was greatly beyond their expectations. They had gone out for wool, but come back shorn. No. Ling Han immediately shook his head. Poison is called poison because of regulations. When one gets to the bottom of the matter, there's not much difference between the regulations of poison and slaughter, time and space. The Empress deduced many things from this and immediately understood Ling Han's thought process and said, but in this neutral zone, regulations have been broken, and the regulation of poison could possibly become regulation of wood, which is instead filled with powerful vitality and life. So when we used our poison pill to kill this monster with poison, not only did it have no effect, it instead caused it to become even stronger. Hunyo clapped her hands once and declared, "Then we will use a tonic to poison it to death." Chapter 2234, Storm secretly brewing. Chapter 2234. Storm secretly brewing. Since poison could not kill it, they would use a tonic to replace the poison. That sounded very ridiculous, but in this new heaven and earth where regulations were chaotic, it could very possibly happen. Ling Han pondered for a while and then shook his head. No. Though that poison has become a tonic for it, it does not mean that a tonic would definitely become poison for it, because there are too many regulations. Who knows which regulation here should correspond to the regulation of poison? The Rain Emperor and the others thought for a while and nodded as well. Perhaps it was the regulation of metal that corresponded to the regulation of poison here, or it might be water, lightning, or other regulations. This was a new heaven and earth with new regulations. Then what do we do? Try them one after another? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked, unwilling to abandon the matter. Ling Han shook his head. Concocting a cauldron's worth of poison pills has already expended much of my resources. If we were to test them all one after another, our wealth would not suffice at all. Then what do we do? I got it. Ling Han suddenly clapped his hands once. We will continue to feed poison pills to this guy. Oh no, Nyo's Ling Han has gone mad. Hu Nyo stroked Ling Han's head. To the great monster, that would be a tonic. Ling Han smilingly answered, I know. The Empress and the Rain Emperor immediately understood and nodded as they said, I understand now. What have you guys understood? Bewitching Maiden Ro's expression was completely filled with bafflement. What she hated the most was when people spoke in riddles in front of her. Ling Han did not keep her hanging because Hu Nyo was here. Anyone who kept the little girl hanging had to prepare themselves for her going on berserk. He said, this cauldron of poison pills can be considered to have very obvious effects on that monster, and its cultivation level has greatly advanced. That's right. So why do we still have to give it more? Bewitching Maiden Ro blinked her eyes, puzzlement still on her face. Ling Han laughed and replied, but don't forget, there is a restriction on cultivation level here. Even if a celestial king wanted to force his way in, it would only result in his body bursting and subsequent death. Now that Ling Han had said this, the bewitching Maiden Ro also finally understood and said, oh, so you are planning to stuff this monster till it bursts. This monster could improve its cultivation level through feeding on poison pills, but there was a restriction on cultivation level here. Once its cultivation level passed that limit, its fate would be going off with pay-exploding. Even if this monster had been nurtured by the heaven and earth and could enjoy some privileges, it still had to bear the restrictions. In the heaven and earth, there had to be rules to adhere to. Let's go. We'll go back and buy more ingredients and continue to concoct alchemical pills. They returned to base camp. The Rain Emperor and the others put forward their respective cultivation resources and went into the city's trade market to trade for the ingredients they needed for the poison pills. Clear Heaven Pass was very big, though its natural resources were scarce because there were things like the remains of elites of the foreign realm. It actually did not lack resources for cultivation, because these remains were extremely useful and could be refined into alchemical pills, precious tools, and so on. Especially after the students of Saintly Origin Academy had come, the trade market had also become incredibly prosperous. On the one hand, they had brought the plentiful materials of the celestial realm, and on the other hand, there were such unique raw materials like the remains of elites of the foreign realm. Ling Han arrived at the market, yet discovered to his surprise that the beast flesh from the neutral zone had also been put up for sale here. Furthermore, their effects were clearly indicated they could replenish the power of regulation. This incited great commotion, and wealthy people threw away money recklessly, fighting fiercely to buy it. A newly created world had formed. Even if it was pitifully small, it still contained enormous, great fortune. The various great forces were actually all eyeing this, but because the neutral zone restricted the levels of elites, everyone could only sit by and watch. And what was the most important? No one had seen the formation of a new world and observed this process. This would be extremely helpful for them to understand the formation of the celestial realm, and this problem indicated straight at the core of regulations, or might even have surpassed regulations, Percy. So how important was this? Thus, the beast meat that could replenish regulations was naturally hot selling. Its significance and value were really too enormous. Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head. Before him, there had to have been others who had discovered the great use of the beast meat. After all, he had entered later, but they, like him, had chosen to get rich quietly and earn a great profit before the news had been spread. However, there was no concealing the truth. With someone selling beast flesh, this secret would naturally be exposed. He could imagine that by today, there would be countless people surging into the neutral zone and beginning a mad hunting spree. Moreover, since the celestial realm had discovered this fact, how could it be that the foreign realm would be ignorant of that? The intensity of the competition could possibly surpass everyone's expectations. Ling Han couldn't be bothered about this. He first bought all the materials that were needed, then returned to base camp and continued concocting poison pills. Clear Heaven Pass, inside a massive stone castle. The encompassing age, Celestial King, sat high above. He was a ninth heaven Celestial King, and was already stationed here several epochs ago. He also possessed a powerful force in Clear Heaven Pass. In truth, the number of Celestial Kings in Clear Heaven Pass was definitely the highest in the entire Celestial Realm. If this power suddenly surged into the Celestial Realm, the power structure of the Celestial Realm would definitely experience a revolutionary change. However, to oppose the foreign realm, the Celestial Kings had reached an agreement. Every Celestial King could only stay outside for a certain period of time, after which they had to come to Clear Heaven Pass and serve. Of course, after achieving some great merit, they could still return to the Celestial Realm and enjoy a period of peace before returning. However, most Celestial Kings had sprouted roots here. Why? Because it was possible that there was a chance to break through to the heavenly venerable tier here. The clash of the two realms could possibly lead to a gap, allowing them to surpass the Celestial King tier and ascend to heavenly venerable tier. Around the encompassing age Celestial King, his 7 sons were seated, and they were known as the 7 kings of the Chong clan. They were all Celestial Kings, each more excellent than the last. The eldest was a 5th heaven Celestial King, and the youngest was a 7th heaven Celestial King, who was not too far away from 9th heaven Celestial King tier. Father, we should make some plans about that neutral zone as well, the 5th son of the Chong clan said. The encompassing age Celestial King's eyes were closed, with him sitting as still as a statue. The 7 kings of the Chong clan were all accustomed to this appearance of their father. The eldest said loudly, "With the heaven and earth newly created, we could observe the earliest Tao, which would be helpful for us to step out of the Celestial King tier and progress towards Heavenly Venerable tier. It is probable that those beings have advanced into the Heavenly Venerable tier like this as well, isn't it?" the 2nd son of the Chong clan asked. At this time, the encompassing age Celestial King suddenly opened his eyes, and the 7 kings of the Chong clan immediately fell silent. "I have made a prediction, and there is great fortune in this heaven and earth," the encompassing age Celestial King said. After his eyes were open, celestial light shone in all directions, as if he could see the future. "Father, then what should we do?" the 3rd son of the Chong clan asked. "Try to occupy as much territory as possible," the encompassing age Celestial King said. "However, there are many forces that are targeting that place. All of you are to do as much as you can, but do not be too deliberate. Now is not yet the time for an all-out competition." The 7 kings of the Chong clan all nodded and answered respectfully, "Yes, father." On the banks of a lake, the waters rippled brightly. An old man was presently fishing, while a young man stood behind him, bowing and standing solemnly. Fei-Ching, that new heaven and earth is about to truly open. A great fortune lies within. At present, I cannot enter yet, so it is up to you to go and make preliminary arrangements, the old man said calmly, his eyes closed. Understood, the young man replied respectfully. His name was Meng Fei-Ching, and he was one of the many disciples of this old man. He was also the youngest of them, as well as the one who had the brightest future prospects. Fortune is in the grasp of the heavens and in one's own hands. I have predicted that a core could possibly be created in this new world. If one can obtain it, one could possibly obtain the secrets of source power of the regulations of the heaven and earth. Meng Fei-Ching looked excited. This disciple will definitely obtain the core of the heaven and earth for master. The old man nodded and said, Go on. I have confidence in you. Understood. Chapter 2235. Clear the area. Chapter 2235. Clear the area. Ling Han and the others entered once more into the neutral zone. It was a walk in the park for them. Very soon, they arrived back at that valley, but because the effects of beast meat had already been exposed, they had also come across a great number of hunters on their way. Even in this valley, there were people doing a sweep and trying their luck. Thankfully, it was still only immortal palace-tiers that could enter into the neutral zone, and it looked like this would continue for another period of time, so there was no need to worry that they would encounter an ascending origin tier and be outmatched. There were not many people in the valley because the rocks here were too sharp, so everyone would have to step on air. This would expend their power of regulation, and as time passed, no one would be able to hold on. Thus, everyone merely roamed around and then left the valley. The problem was there was a continuous flow of cultivators entering the valley. It was like if they could not check personally and confirm that there were no newly born foreign beasts here, they would not be able to rest easy. Ling Han and the others arrived at their destination, all of them frowning heavily because there would be people passing by occasionally, and the poison pills that they threw in would cause a great stir from that underground creature, so it would definitely draw over others within the vicinity. If there is anyone tactless, then we can only settle it with a battle, Ling Han said. The Rain Emperor and the others all nodded. Speaking of battle, they really feared no one. Aside from the fact that they did indeed have extremely strong battle prowess, they also had the Black Tower which could replenish their power of regulation. This was much more useful than beast meat. Ling Han took out the poison pills. This time he had invested a lot and had concocted a total of 41 pills. If this was still not able to deal with that creature, then all 5 of them would really have a great loss. High-grade celestial pills. Someone passed by, then immediately came back and shouted, Let go of the celestial pills! Ling Han looked over. That was a young man with lanky build, dressed in embroidered robes. Yet they could not distinguish whether he was a native or a student of the Saintly Origin Academy just from that, because the attire of natives now was also very much keeping up with the trends. Why? He asked. Yet his hand loosened its grip, and all 41 poison pills instantly rolled downwards, following the cave mouth. Damn you! The man was furious, and thought that Ling Han would rather waste so many celestial pills instead of handing them over to him. He stretched out his hand. His origin power took the form of multiple thin chains that darted into that cave mouth, wanting to stop the progress of the celestial pills. As for Ling Han, he would deal with him once he had retrieved the celestial pills. Scram! The Rain Emperor humphed and shot out a punch. An aura that dominated the world surged out, and that person was instantly forced backwards. The man was stunned, and only then did he look seriously towards Ling Han and his group as he said, I couldn't tell that you outsiders would actually have such strength. He was a 4th secret and should be an emperor tier. Go, 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 kid, don't disturb our playtime. Hunyo waved her hand dismissively. Playtime. The man's expression was strange. You guys have taken out so many celestial pills and tossed them into the cave, all for the sake of playtime? Who would play around like you guys? Who? Right at this time, a strong suction surged from the cave mouth. Instantly, the pebbles in the surrounding area were all rolling towards the cave mouth. That man immediately understood and exclaimed, "As it turned out, there is also a foreign beast hidden here. Ha 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 ha. You guys have thrown the celestial pills in to draw it out. That's not right." To lure out a foreign beast, they should not have thrown the celestial pills in. This did not make sense in terms of logic. Could it be that they really were playing around? "Hey, annoying guy, aren't you leaving?" Hunyo demanded impatiently. "There is no one that can speak that way to me. Tu Jing Tian." The young man humphed, his expression filled with arrogance. He really could make no sense of the actions of Ling Han and his group, yet he was intrigued and wanted to see what exactly was going on here. "Then I'll beat you bastard up." Hunyo moved and charged to attack Tu Jingtian. As Tu Jingtian battled with Hunyo, he released a battle cry. The moment they exchanged blows, Tu Jingtian got the upper hand. Hunyo was indeed a monarch tier, but the battle prowess of a first secret monarch tier was more or less equivalent to a second secret emperor tier, and Tu Jingtian was a third secret emperor tier. This was an entire minor level, and there was at least a gap of 10 times their battle prowess. Thankfully, Hunyo still had a source power of heaven and earth, and Tu Jingtian also had his reservations, not daring to greatly expend his power of regulation. Thus, though Hunyo was at a disadvantage, she could still hold on for the moment. She would not be defeated soon. Ling Han and the others were all unconcerned. If Hunyo encountered danger, then whether it was Ling Han or the Rain Emperor that moved, they would both be able to easily resolve her dilemma. Now, their attention was mostly concentrated on the underground. Xiao, xiao, xiao. A while later, a total of 8 people, 7 men and 1 woman, flew over from various directions. "Jingtian, why are you fighting with someone?" a beautiful woman asked. She seemed to be the leader of the group. "Aunt Jean, I suspect they have discovered the lair of a beast, and are presently trying to lure it out," Tu Jingtian said as he continued battling. He enjoyed the upper hand, so he was naturally completely calm. "Beast lair." The 8 of them all looked towards the cave mouth, all bearing expressions of suspicion. This cave mouth was too tiny, so what big guy could be hiding? The beautiful woman frowned and seemed to be considering. However, after only a while, she declared, "All of you step down. This valley now belongs to our Tu clan." These words were naturally directed at Ling Han and his group, her attitude high and haughty. They had already been at Clear Heaven Pass for many days, so Ling Han naturally had some understanding of the forces that were here. It could be said that there were frighteningly many celestial kings here. In these several epochs, the majority of celestial kings had all come here and settled down. Some had had their descendants here, while others had taken disciples. In short, there were overwhelmingly large numbers of celestial king tier forces here. Ascending origin tiers didn't even have the qualification to become the support of a force. If it was the surname Tu, right? There was a 4th heaven celestial king with the surname of Tu, and these 9 people should be the descendants of celestial King Tuesday. How could Ling Han possibly leave? To say nothing of the fact that these 9 people were the descendants of only a 4th heaven celestial king. Even if they were descended from a 9th heaven celestial king, there would be no way that he would leave. He stood, arms crossed behind his back, and asked smilingly, "What if we don't leave?" Tu Jin humphed and commanded, "Clear the area." "Yes." The 7 people behind her all bowed and obeyed. Then they leaped out, launching an offensive at Ling Han and the others. Hong, long, long. Right at this moment, the ground suddenly trembled harshly. Thankfully, everyone was all standing in midair, or they would definitely have stumbled and fallen over. What's going on? Tu Jin and the others were all astounded. They naturally would not be concerned about any ordinary earthquake, but this was a newly created heaven and earth. If a great commotion happened here, that would mean that the heaven and earth was still evolving. This was the mighty power of world creation, and even a celestial king was no match for that. How could they possibly be unafraid? That's not right. Jean immediately calmed down. It is not a massive change that has taken place in the heaven and earth, but a great beast that lies under the ground. She could already sense a powerful aura. At first, she was overjoyed because the stronger this aura was, the higher the cultivation level of the creature beneath it meant, and the more astonishing its value would be. Beast meat could replenish power of regulation, and the celestial medicine it nurtured could be at the immortal palace tier and had astonishing effects. But very quickly her expression of delighted surprise turned into fear because this aura was strong to the extent of abnormality. A ascending origin tier. Even her voice was trembling. At present, this heaven and earth did not allow ascending origin tier elites to step in at all. Yet now a great ascending origin tier creature had actually emerged here. What did that mean? As long as this great beast wished it, all of them would have to die. How could this not be frightening? Chapter 2236. Forcibly Enduring the Heavenly Tribulation. Chapter 2236. Forcibly Enduring the Heavenly Tribulation. No one made another move. It was possible that there was a great ascending origin tier beast hidden here. Once it emerged, it would be capable of insta-killing everyone who would be in the mood for further battle. If they lost their lives, there would be nothing left. Yet Ling Han was very steady. Even a heavenly venerate could only ignore regulations, but could not reign supreme over the heaven and earth. This land was newly created, and the regulations of heaven and earth were still being perfected, and it was the heaven and earth that was strongest. Perhaps if a heavenly venerate came, they could forcibly destroy this heaven and earth. After all, it had just been formed like a newborn infant. There was no way it could be a match for a heavenly venerate. Thus, it was impossible for the great beast to emerge. The only possibility was that the heaven and earth would crush it. Long, the heaven and earth trembled, and the aura that seeped out was becoming more and more terrifying. Run, flee quickly! Jean hurriedly exclaimed. Xiao! The 9 members of the Tu clan all activated their power of regulation without reservations, forcibly streaking through the air and leaving this damned place as quickly as they could. In the outside world, an ascending origin tier was not even worth much, as there were more than enough celestial kings in Clear Heaven Pass, but in this place an ascending origin tier was undoubtedly a supreme overlord. Who would be able to match such an existence? However, while they fled, there were even more people that had come to investigate after hearing the commotion. After all, a great many celestial kings had made predictions that with the new birth of this heaven and earth, there would be astonishingly great fortune emerging. But those from Clear Heaven Pass naturally knew one another, especially for those that were involved with celestial kings. The 9 clansmen of the Tu clan did not dare to conceal such important intel. Otherwise, if descendants of 9th Heaven celestial kings died here, how would they be able to bear such responsibility? Hence, as they fled, they called out loudly about a great ascending origin tier creature emerging, and to flee as quickly as possible. Ascending origin tier. This petrified the rest as well, and they hurriedly fled together. Hunyok clapped her hands and laughed loudly at this. This was like a stone that had been thrown and created 1,000 ripples. It was a very interesting scene. The aura that was seeping from beneath the ground was becoming more and more frightening. Even those outside the valley could clearly sense it, and they did not dare approach at all. They turned and fled at the very first chance. The news of a great beast emerging rapidly spread, and a great many forces all avoided the calamity. However, there were also some people that went against the flow. For example, Meng Feiqing. Master has said that this land could possibly form a core of heaven and earth. Only when the heaven and earth is newly formed will there be a core. When the heaven and earth stabilizes, it will slowly disappear. The core of the heaven and earth contains the secret of the origins of a world, and is the mother of regulations. If one could obtain it, there would be hopes of breaking through to the heavenly venerable tier, he murmured softly. Though this is a world that has been created from the clash of the two realms, even if the core of heaven and earth that is created could not possibly compare to the core when the celestial realm was first created, it is ultimately a precious treasure superior to all other celestial medicines. This land is clearly only restricted to the cultivation level of the immortal palace tier, yet a great ascending origin tier creature is about to emerge. This means that the core of heaven and earth is very possibly there. His eyes glowed brightly, and he moved quickly, becoming faster and faster. Boom, boom, boom. Within the valley, the ground was moving like a carpet. It was not something as simple as undulating, but every tremor brought with it a terrifying force. Pung! Ling Han crushed the ground that was attacking into bits, feeling that his fist was actually slightly aching. This was merely the aftermath that had been created by the great ascending origin tier beast, but it was actually so powerful. If they faced this great beast directly, then they clearly would be run down in an instant. The heaven and earth has restricted the cultivation level, but there is actually a great ascending origin tier beast here. Furthermore, it is still continuously becoming stronger. Would it be the strongest creature of this place? The Empress suddenly asked. Ling Han pondered for a moment, nodded, and replied, "Perhaps it is the source beast of source beasts, the strongest king." When the heaven and earth was newly created, the earliest batch of creatures born would all be called source beasts. This was the beginning of life. However, other creatures were only in the immortal palace tier and dividing soul tier, and only this one had reached ascending origin tier, so it was naturally extremely special. Perhaps its value would surpass all our imagination. They had merely wanted the meat and celestial medicine of this great beast, but from the look of things now, perhaps the value of this great beast far surpassed that level. Hong, long, long. It was like the ground was being beaten. Every tremor drove straight into the heart. Even if they were immortal palace tiers, so what? They were all pale, feeling like their hearts were about to leap out of their chests and suffering from indescribable discomfort. Thankfully, Ling Han and his group were all extremely strong. Even bewitching Maiden Row was a pinnacle emperor tier, and she just barely managed to suppress this discomfort. The aura of that great beast was increasing without limits, and had already touched the upper limit of the ascending origin tier. It had indeed been doted on by the heaven and earth, with strength that far surpassed other creatures, yet it was still unable to cast off the restrictions of the regulations, and could only hide underground, and could not emerge. Actually, this was already a back door that had been opened to it, but if it continued to strengthen further like this, even the heaven and earth would not be able to show it more favoritism. After all, the heaven and earth was unable to directly interfere in worldly affairs, and could only do so through regulations. However, regulations were merciless, channeling like the cogs of a wheel, accurate, precise, and completely fair. When this great beast actually seemed like it would break through to the celestial king tier, the regulations of this land began targeting it harshly. Dark thunderclouds appeared out of nowhere, but there was no lightning flashing. Instead, boundless flames blazed, but they did not surge. It was like they were accumulating power. Not good, Run. Ling Han's expression changed drastically. Indeed, the heavenly tribulation would not deal with others besides its target. But if this others, in a stroke of great misfortune, happened to be within its coverage, especially when it was standing in the way of descent of the heavenly tribulation, the heavenly tribulation would also erase them without any mercy. The great beast was underground, and they were standing above ground, just right between the heavenly tribulation and the great beast. Wasn't this just asking for a beating? The 5 of them hurriedly broke into a run, all using their utmost efforts. Boom! Right at this moment, a fiery red sword light shot down from the clouds, crashing down in the direction of the valley. This sword light was made up of flames, with countless seals tightly interwoven, exuding an aura that was powerful to the extreme. Boom! The fiery blade descended. It was like the heavens had moved and shot out a blade that could obliterate gods and kill deities. Hong Long Long, the whole valley was instantly destroyed, rocks flying and dancing, shooting out in all directions. Hong Long Long, Ling Han, and his group were all hit by these bits of rock. They were like artillery shells, rapidly flying out of the valley. They landed heavily on the ground. Ling Han and the others were still fine, but bewitching Maiden Ro was directly throwing up blood, considerable injuries inflicted on her whole body, and she looked incredibly battered. Ling Han's physique was tough and could still sustain this kind of blow. He gritted his teeth. Their group seemed to have caused too much of a commotion. Now, to say nothing of those in the area, it was probable that the whole neutral zone could see such a shocking scene. This heaven and earth had been newly created, and the regulations were not complete yet. There was no creature that had experienced the heavenly tribulation, yet Ling Han and his group had somehow caused one of them to experience a heavenly tribulation. This was amazing, wasn't it? Furthermore, that creature that was enduring the heavenly tribulation was the strongest great beast that could only hide at other times. The heaven and earth showed its might, wanting to erase this existence that had surpassed the regulations. Fiery blades descended one after another, frightening without bounds. Ling Han and his group could only stand by and watch. The whole valley had already turned into an ocean of flames. This was not just a description, but it had really turned into an ocean of flames. The original valley had long since been razed to the ground. Seals were still flickering within the ocean of fire. That was the strongest regulation of fire of this land. Perhaps it had not reached the celestial king tier, but it was close. Otherwise, it would not be qualified to kill that great beast. Roar! Amidst a furious roar, a massive creature leaped out of the fire, howling angrily at the heavens. Chapter 2237, Standing Off Against the Heavens. Chapter 2237, Standing Off Against the Heavens. This was a giant creature, thousands of meters tall. It looked like a whale, but had a pair of wings. They were not the wings of a bird, but the fleshy wings of a bat. There were also tiny claws, one sprouting from the wings, covered with black scales and resembling supreme divine metal. This is that great beast. Ling Han and his group all mumbled. This great beast was a combination of the unique traits of the creatures of both celestial realm and foreign realm. For example, this whale was a form of the celestial realm, but the bat-like wings were unique to the foreign realm. The great beast roared furiously at the skies, its voice turning into a massive wave that blasted out in all directions. Ling Han and the Rain Emperor exchanged looks, and then shot out, pushing out their hands at the skies. Boom! The sound wave was already assaulting, immediately pushing them into a backward slide. Both of them released furious roars as well, bursting out with astonishing power, propping up a safe space, and protecting Hunyeo and the other women. Shwa, shwa, shwa. The fabric covering their arms was instantly ripped into shreds, and multiple wounds appeared on their arms, which was quickly followed by the raising of pieces of flesh and blood, revealing eerily white bone. This was too terrifying. The great beast had merely roared, and already had such might. Even two great monarch stars were placed under such strain. Thankfully, the sound wave finally passed over. Even Ling Han and the Rain Emperor seemed like they were about to collapse, but it was only for a moment. Not only had they exhausted the majority of the power of regulation in their bodies, even the dragon chi that they had previously accumulated through the dragon transformation technique was completely exhausted. The strength of this great beast far surpasses an ordinary ascending origin tier. Ling Han said with absolute certainty. It was not that he had never seen an ascending origin tier move, but their strength was who knew how inferior as compared to this great beast. It very possibly is the king of this land and was originally destined to reign over all living creatures, the Empress said slowly. This great beast really had very bad luck to actually encounter a 4-star alchemist like Ling Han, who had rushed its growth at all costs. As a result, it was now targeted by the regulations of the heaven and earth, wanting to erase its existence. It was too strong, and the regulations would not permit that. Now the valley has turned into an ocean of flames, fused with the regulations of the two realms, and we can't approach either. How will we be able to retrieve the corpse of this great beast then? Ling Han asked, stuck in a dilemma. They had paid such a heavy price, so if they really got nothing out of it, it would be much too great a loss. We can only wait. The great beast's strength was incredibly powerful. It was defying the heavens, wanting to cut out a path of survival for itself. Say, if it didn't die, would it become the heavenly venerate of this heaven and earth? Ling Han suddenly asked out of nowhere. This great beast's strength had already surpassed the limits of the regulations. If even the regulations could do nothing against it, it would be able to ignore the regulations. Then, wouldn't that be a heavenly venerate? However, with the different level of the heaven and earth here, the strength of heavenly venerable tier would also be different. A heavenly venerate here would only be the level of the celestial king tier. But if this great beast managed to survive, it would definitely be nothing that the 5 of them could match. They would only be able to give up any idea of obtaining treasures from it. Sigh. Ling Han sighed. Sigh. Hunyo sighed as well. Sigh. 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 All 5 of them were feeling very gloomy. At first, they had wanted to make some profit, but they had not expected that this would be the actual result. Great beast, please, please die. Hunyo placed her hands together, her expression extremely sincere. Nyo still wants to have a taste of your flesh. You must not disappoint Nyo, or Nyo will curse you to be single for life. The other 4 immediately laughed at this. Hunyo was still Hunyo. Her thought processes were always different from the rest. The great beast battled the heavens. It brandished its wings, creating wild winds with every rise and fall, and turning them into blades of wind that swept towards the skies, tearing through the flames by force. So strong! Could it really defy the heavens and even destroy the heavenly tribulation? The 5 of them were all worried. Thankfully, though the fiery clouds had been broken up, even more fiery clouds rolled out very soon, forming a frightening assault. The power of man was limited, but the power of heaven and earth was without bounds. The great beast held on stubbornly, its ways endless. It could control the various regulations of water, fire, lightning, metal, and so on, plus other regulations that Ling Han and his group could not understand. These should be regulations of the foreign realm. But no matter how it struggled, the power of heaven and earth was always stronger. In the pond of this heaven and earth, all existences would only be tiny fish. How could they possibly stand off against the heaven and earth? This great beast began to sustain injuries, dripping blood from all over its body, and its blood was actually inky green in color, possessing astonishing life energy. As it splattered onto the ground, there would actually be grass struggling to sprout in those spots. Then the blood would take form and assume the forms of small deer, puppies, and so on, running around all over. Ling Han and the others were all watching dumbstruck. This great beast was definitely an amazing great herb. Its life energy was too boundless. That's not certain. The Rain Emperor immediately rained on the parade. The regulations of the 2 realms are different, and the blood of the great beast may be a supreme tonic for this land, but for us it could be poison. True, Ling Han and the others all nodded, because the poison that they had concocted was a shockingly effective tonic for the great beast. It might be that its blood and flesh would be a powerful poison for them. Still, the life energy of that great beast is so strong that even its blood can manifest into other living creatures. This is the power of creation. Exactly what kind of existence is it? Having surpassed the limits of regulations, it was still alive, and its blood could form living creatures. This was too unimaginable. The limits to the great power of heaven and earth are really unimaginable, even if we scramble our brains. The 5 of them mused ruefully. More and more people were appearing. Not one person approached. They were all watching from a distance. Who would dare stand in the way of the great power of heaven and earth? But all of them knew that this great beast was close to the end of its line, and its flesh and blood would be of great use. And this great beast was also close to the brink of crumbling, one of its wings having been forcibly ripped off, its tail severed by a fiery blade, and even eerily white bone could be seen from various spots of its body. Its aura was rising and falling unsteadily. This was a sign of impending death. Everyone was keen and restless. Once this great beast was killed by the heavenly tribulation, a fierce competition would break out among them. Consumption of the meat of this great beast might allow one to obtain the amazing techniques of source power of this heaven and earth. And just how valuable would be the celestial medicine that had been nurtured by this great beast. Second brother, you go and snatch the corpse of that great beast later. I will take a look underground, Ling Han said. The corpse of the great beast was indeed precious. But Ling Han was more curious about the location that was capable of nurturing such a great beast. Perhaps an even more shocking secret lay there. Of course, it was also possible that there was absolutely nothing there. All right. The Rain Emperor nodded, confident and domineering. Ling Han looked towards Hunyeo and the Empress. The 2 of you help out, second brother. N. The 2 women nodded. If it was merely exploring, 1 person would be enough, but the competition on the surface would need manpower. What about me? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked very energetically. She had no wish to be a mere spectator. You. Ling Han stared at her. Bewitching Maiden Ro's expression was filled with anticipation. She did not mind how difficult the mission that Ling Han delegated to her would be. On the contrary, that would mean that Ling Han had a high opinion of her. Ling Han pondered for a while, and then finally said, As for you, whatever you like. Fuck! Bewitching Maiden Ro puffed up in fury. For better or worse, she was also a first secret emperor tier, and would be put in an important position in any great force. After all, even in Great Ninth Heaven's Celestial King tier sects, there would only be less than 10 emperor tiers. Ling Han ignored her and merely stared at the skies in concentration. Boom! A frightening wave of flames surged past, and the great beast was suddenly cut in half. It released a wave of defiance through its divine sense, yet its form was rapidly falling from the skies, and its aura was immediately beginning to disperse.